to impose a backstop, divergence or anything else that will separate us from the rest of the United Kingdom.
Mr. Speaker, we have been absolutely clear. The Prime Minister has been clear. I have been clear. We respect the fact that there needs to be legal text to put the backstop into legal text, but that legal text has to be clear that the economic and constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom is sacrosanct.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For 2 years, I operated a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. I see no reason whatsoever why technology can't make it very soft, indeed invisible. Does the Secretary of State agree?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable and gallant friend has great experience of his time in Northern Ireland. I'm sure he knows how difficult it was to police that border. 30,000 military and police were unable to close that border. I don't expect that we will be able to, that anybody should expect that we would see a hard border today. But I would be very happy to have a conversation with him about the points about technology so that we can really explore all of that.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And may I, from the bottom of my heart, congratulate the honourable gentleman opposite on his long-deserved, well-merited elevation to the dizzy heights of Minister of State. I look forward to working with him. However, there is a cloud on the horizon. Mr. Speaker, the current counter-terrorism and border security bill going through Parliament at the present time contains within it a proposal unique in the United Kingdom for unfettered, unqualified stop and search along the border. I think we must never forget that there are those who have to police the border. Would the Secretary of State or the Minister of State look and speak with their opposite numbers about the implications of this piece of ill-thought-out legislation, because I see trouble brewing on the border if it goes ahead?
Mr. Speaker, can I say we are delighted on this side of the House that the honourable gentleman is still in his place. We had some concerns over the summer when we saw the very welcome appointment of his colleague that this may impact on his position, and we're grateful that it has not. We are aware of concerns that have been raised in Northern Ireland concerning this piece of legislation, which is a specific piece of legislation to deal with the threat elsewhere, but we are in discussions and conversations to give assurances to those in Northern Ireland about the concerns they've raised.
The honourable gentleman is personal testimony to the survival of rare breeds, and I think the whole House is grateful for that important fact. Tom Pursglove.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Northern Ireland has proven itself to be a top destination for inward investment, both from companies from the rest of the UK and also from overseas. Over 900 companies worldwide have invested in Northern Ireland, and I welcome the announcement this week that PA Consulting will be creating 400 new jobs in Belfast. I firmly believe, however, Mr. Speaker, that Northern Ireland can do even better, and we continue to work to restore stable, devolved government so that Northern Ireland can maximise its potential as a place to invest and do business.
I share in the enthusiasm in the Minister's answer, and Northern Ireland is very clearly a key driver of United Kingdom exports and will be even more important as we leave the European Union. So what steps is the Department taking to foster further investment and also to sell the opportunity of Northern Ireland as a top exporter around the world?
Mr. Speaker, can I just say that one of the fastest routes to a strong economy is through a healthy, growing export economy. The Northern Ireland office is working with departments across Whitehall, including the Department for International Trade, to maximise UK government initiatives such as the Great Campaign and the recently launched Export Strategy to help and promote exporters to realise their potential. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, and I regularly champion new investment announcements in Northern Ireland and promoting Northern Ireland as a great place to invest and do business. And this is something that was referred to in the budget as well.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. How on earth does the Minister expect to attract inward investment into Northern Ireland when we haven't had a functioning Assembly for 18 months and we've had a Secretary of State who said she was minded to cut the salaries of the MLAs, and she said that some months ago. She has done nothing, absolutely nothing about cutting MLA salaries. So could the Minister give us some very good news today and announce a cut to MLA salaries?
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to be able to give some very good news to the Honourable Lady, and that is to say that amongst the many companies that are investing in Northern Ireland. One of them is in July, Allstate, a US company, opened Northern Ireland's largest single office development for 15 years, investing £30 million. Allstate employ around 2,200 jobs in sites in Belfast, Derry and Strabane. So notwithstanding the present circumstances and of not having devolved administration, the economy is still looking up, business coming in, and we continue to try to have that devolved administration up and running.
Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 4 and 5 together. I'm acutely aware of the deep frustration and difficulties faced by the people of Northern Ireland and the urgent need to re-establish a locally elected, democratically accountable devolved government. I remain in close contact with the 5 main political parties and the Irish Government where appropriate.
Bruce.
Minister, the roles of the Northern Irish parties and their assembly should be respected. So would the Minister confirm that the legality of taking misoprostol, the second pill in medical abortions, at home in Northern Ireland is something for the people of Northern Ireland and their locally elected representatives to determine?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that abortion is a devolved matter in Northern Ireland, and this means it is only right that questions of laws and policy on abortion, including the legality of any medicines, are decided on by a devolved government in Northern Ireland.
James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given it's now over 18 months since the Assembly was suspended, will the Prime Minister now become more involved in the process along with the Taoiseach?
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the Honourable Lady that the Prime Minister is very involved in the conversations that we have and the discussions we have with all main political parties. On her visit to Northern Ireland at the beginning of the summer, she met all 5 main parties in Northern Ireland and had discussions with them about that. And again, I continue to discuss with the Irish Government, including the Taoiseach, who I saw on Sunday.
Mrs. Theresa Villiers.
With very important decisions on matters such as NHS pay and planning now held up by legal uncertainty, isn't it time that this House considered legislating to give civil servants the powers they need to take these decisions?
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, who has considerable experience in this matter, experience beyond that of many people in this House, is quite right that there are very many decisions. I am looking carefully at the court judgments and determining the best course of action to ensure that we have the best chance of re-establishing devolved government in Stormont, but also making sure there is good governance for the people of Northern Ireland.
Donaldson. The Secretary of State will know that 4 out of the 5 political parties eligible to be in the executive will join the executive tomorrow. It is one party, Sinn Féin, holding the people of Northern Ireland to ransom. Is it not therefore time for the Secretary of State to start ensuring that decisions are made that affect my constituents and those of my right honourable and honourable friends, so that the people of Northern Ireland have some form of government?
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman has made very many representations to me on this point. I know how passionately he stands up for his constituents in Lagan Valley, many of whom I met yesterday at the Hillsborough Garden Party and who were very, very complimentary about their Member of Parliament. I continue to have discussions with all 5 main parties, because the important point is we get devolved government up and running as soon as possible, but we do ensure there is good governance in Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State will know it's now 600 days this weekend since Northern Ireland has had no functioning Assembly or functioning executive. Now, can she tell the House very clearly what urgent steps she will take to bring the 5 parties together, to reconvene the British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference, to cut the pay of MLAs, as has been asked already, and of course, importantly, to make sure that there's now real urgency put in? We'll support legislation where appropriate, but that legislation has got to be brought forward urgently now.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his offer of support for legislation. I am looking at all the options available to us. We know there are court cases that have hampered decision-making and are making things more uncertain. We are acutely aware of that, and I want to make sure that we do something that is coherent, that works for the people of Northern Ireland, and does not prevent politicians in Northern Ireland going back into devolved government.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this government has a strong track record of promoting and supporting LGBT rights across the United Kingdom, including equal marriage. I was proud to demonstrate this support by having the rainbow flag flown from Stormont House last month to mark Belfast Pride.
Jed Killer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but flags are not enough. On everything from mental health to civil rights, LGBT people in Northern Ireland are worse off than the rest of the UK. But groups I met recently say they get no funding from the Assembly or from Westminster, and there was nothing in the government's LGBT action plan. Will she consider the creation of a discretionary fund to ensure these groups get the support they need, particularly while there is no functioning Assembly?
Mr. Speaker, I will look at the point that the honourable gentleman has made, and I have met many groups representing LGBT interests in Northern Ireland. But these matters, many of these matters are devolved, and they should quite rightly be resolved by the devolved government in Stormont.
Pollard! Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One day I hope to marry my beautiful boyfriend, and I can do that because I live in England, where civil partnerships and equal marriage are legal. When will couples like me and Sydney, who live in Northern Ireland, be able to set a date so they can marry?
Mr. Speaker, I think we're all looking forward to the day, and I give congratulations to the honourable gentleman. I voted for same-sex marriage to be legal in my own constituency, and I'm very proud that I did that. But it is quite right that these are matters that are dealt with by the devolved government. That's why we need a devolved government in Stormont, so we can resolve these issues.
Order, order. Members are making far too much noise in the chamber. I'm quite sure it's not something I would ever have done as a backbench member, and I'm sure the House wishes to hear the honourable member for Vauxhall, and that's what it's going to do anyway. Kate Hoey.
Mr. Speaker, the people of Northern Ireland have a proud history of sporting achievements, gained whilst representing both the United Kingdom and Ireland. It is for individual athletes, subject to the rules of their respective sports governing body, to decide which country they wish to represent. This government is wholly supportive of this choice being maintained.
Thank the Minister, but the Minister is, as he knows, quite wrong. If you're a young Northern Ireland sports person who wishes to, for example, box for the United Kingdom, you have to move to Great Britain because otherwise you have to box for Ireland. This happens in other sports. The Belfast Agreement said that everyone had the right to choose to be British or Irish. Surely this must apply to sport, and the Minister has to do more about this because it is just not fair.
Mr. Speaker, may I first of all pay tribute to the Honourable Lady, who I know has taken a passionate interest in this subject, and we have talked about it before. And she will, of course, be aware that Northern Ireland has won serious medals in Commonwealth Games in terms of boxing. As far as the issue itself is concerned, may I just remind her that this is a devolved issue. It's also an issue for individual athletes and indeed their governing sporting bodies to take up. And I would suggest, as far as the Boxing Association Northern Ireland is concerned, that they continue their dialogue with the Department for Communities.
Does the Minister agree with me that all sportsmen and women should have the right to represent the country they choose to, as long as they meet the eligibility criteria for that country?
Mr. Speaker, as I say, if people have the merit to represent their countries, then there's no reason why they shouldn't, subject to the rules of the governing body of that particular sport.
Grant! Number 8, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions 8 and 12 together. The government's commitments in respect of the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland have been consistently clear. There will be no physical infrastructure on the border or related checks and controls. This commitment is also reflected in the December joint report text, which we have committed to translate into legally binding text in the withdrawal agreement.
Peter Grant! Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 9 months, all the government have done by way of proposals for an open border in Ireland is to demand that 27 other sovereign states change their customs systems to collect customs duties on behalf of this government. Why does the government expect every other country in the European Union to sort out the mess that they've created?
Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, I think the honourable gentleman is confusing our proposals in the white paper for the future relationship with our proposals for the legal text, the binding text for the protocol for paragraph 49 of the joint report, which we committed to a legal text, and we are working with the European Union on coming up with a text that we can all live with. But we will not accept the text that was put forward by the European Commission.
Brown! Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary, with no hint of irony, talks about consistency
consistency from this government. The reality is their obsession with ending free movement of people is going to require some form of border control. So how does she square ending free movement of people with her obligations under the Belfast Agreement?
Mr. Speaker, the people of the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, and that means we will regain control of our laws, our borders and our money. But we will also ensure that we meet our commitments that we made in the joint report in December to ensuring no hard border on the island of Ireland and no border in the Irish Sea.
Me Wilson!
Collecting duties on trade across the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic currently happens and doesn't present any problems. The real damage to Northern Ireland and to the integrity of the United Kingdom would be to have regulatory alignment between Northern Ireland and the Republic, giving the EU control over our laws rather than London having control over laws in Northern Ireland. Can she give an assurance that under no circumstances will she agree to the backstop arrangement demanded by the EU, which would split up the United Kingdom by having laws determined?
We're immensely grateful, but far too long. Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I will refer the honourable gentleman back to the comments of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, where she said no Prime Minister of the United Kingdom could accept the text put forward by the European Commission.
Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sure that members from all sides of the House would like to join me in congratulating both the English and the Scottish women's football teams for their excellent performance in qualifying for next year's World Cup. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my constituent, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, was released temporarily for 3 days last month before being hauled back to prison in Iran. Worse still, when she was on furlough, she was contacted by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard saying that if she attempted to contact the British Embassy, her family would be harmed. I find it deeply troubling that a British citizen was threatened against contacting her own embassy. Does the Prime Minister share my concern, and will she raise the specific issue with President Rouhani when she next speaks to him, perhaps in New York later this month?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that I share the concerns that she has expressed, and our thoughts, I know, across the whole House remain with Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe during this difficult time, and with her family and her friends who've been campaigning tirelessly, obviously, for her release. The Honourable Lady will know, as this is her constituent, that one of the difficulties is the question of whether or not the Iranian government recognises dual nationality, which they do not, and they're not obliged to under international law. She asks me to raise this matter with President Rouhani. I regularly do whenever I speak to President Rouhani. It's an issue also that the Foreign Secretary, the Foreign Office, other ministers consistently raise with the Iranian government, and we will continue to do so.
Maggie Throop.
Anti-Semitism has no place in British public life. Will my right honourable friend assure the House that she will always work to make sure that this remains the case?
Can I say to my honourable friend, Jewish people living in this country should feel safe and secure and not have to worry about their futures in their own country. There is no place for racial hatred in our society, and it's important that we take every step to tackle it. That's why, as a government, we were the first country in the world to adopt the definition of anti-Semitism set out by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. We've been taking steps, providing funding to ensure security measures can be taken in Jewish faith schools and synagogues, and we've provided funding to the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust to run events for Holocaust Memorial Day. I believe that we should all be united in our determination to tackle anti-Semitism. So when the leader of the Labour Party stands up, he should apologise for saying that Jewish people who have lived in this country their whole lives do not understand English irony.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker,
There is no place for racism in any form within our society. On that we're all agreed, and we should tackle it wherever it arises, in our own parties as well, and that includes the Conservative Party. I join the Prime Minister in congratulating the English and Scottish women's teams on their qualification for the World Cup, and I look forward to them doing extremely well. Mr. Speaker, the International Trade Secretary said the likelihood of a no deal is now 60-40, which in betting parlance means it's a pretty good chance there won't be a deal, which means more likely than not. So, Prime Minister, is he right?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, we are continuing to do what we have always been doing, which is working to get a good deal with the European Union for our future relationship once we have left the European Union. But it is entirely right and proper that we should prepare for all eventualities, because we haven't come to the end of the negotiations. That means that it's right that we are preparing for no deal, as indeed the European Union have been doing, sending out notices in relation to no deal. So we have been publishing technical notices so that businesses and citizens would know where they stand and how to prepare in the event of no deal. We've published over 20 so far, and the final total is likely to be around 70. We are making those preparations, but crucially, what this government is doing is working for a good deal, preparing for every eventuality, and preparing to ensure that this country makes a success of leaving the EU, regardless of the outcome of the negotiations.
So, Mr. Speaker, the International Trade Secretary says he's unfazed by no deal. The new Foreign Secretary who's here this morning says that over the summer that a no-deal Brexit would be a huge geostrategic mistake. And the Chancellor, who's sitting next to her, has written to the Treasury Select Committee stating that a no-deal Brexit would slash GDP by almost 8%, comparable with the global financial crash. Which assessment does she agree with?
The director of the World Trade Organization said that no deal would not be a walk in the park, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. The government is right. The government is right to make the necessary preparations for no deal, while at the same time we are working for a good deal to ensure that we deliver on the vote of the British people, that we come out of the European Union on the 29th of March 2019, that we do so in a way that protects jobs and livelihoods, ensures no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and maintains the precious union of our United Kingdom. And on one thing, I'm clear. We're working for that outcome, and we will not have a second referendum. He should stand up and rule out a second referendum.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says no deal is better than a bad deal. The Chancellor says no deal would cause a catastrophic collapse of our economy. And yesterday, the Brexit Secretary waded in to say that there were countervailing opportunities to a no-deal Brexit. Could the Prime Minister enlighten us what these countervailing opportunities actually are?
As I said to the right honourable gentleman in answer to his first question, this government is working to ensure that whatever the outcome of the negotiations, this country makes success of coming out of the European Union. We see that global Britain and a brighter future for people here in this country. But interestingly, I suggested to the right honourable gentleman, yet again, as I have done on other occasions, that he stand up and categorically rule out a second referendum. He refused to do so, so I'll give him another opportunity to do it now.
Mr. Speaker, a majority of people might have voted to leave, but they expected the negotiations to be handled competently, and they certainly are not. And I didn't hear a single one of these countervailing opportunities. I say to the Prime Minister quite simply this: she can't keep dancing round all the issues. And it seems that It seems, Mr. Speaker, that Panasonic have taken the cue and have decided to dance off altogether. They're relocating out of this country. Could the Prime Minister tell the House how many other companies have been in touch with her or her ministerial team and told her privately that they intend to relocate in the absence of a serious, sensible deal with the European Union?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, what we have seen is businesses showing confidence in our economy. In August, Dyson announced £200 million of investment in their electric vehicle testing facility in Wiltshire. Two Sisters Food Group, Bernard Matthews, have won major new contracts with supermarkets, underpinning 600 new jobs. The Hut Group have announced 200 new tech jobs in Salford. We welcomed £130 million of foreign direct investment in our automotive sector from 4 companies in July, generating around 500 new jobs. What we're doing is negotiating a Brexit deal that will deliver for this country, deliver on the vote of the British people, and that will ensure we do so protecting jobs, maintaining our union, and ensuring no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And what do we get from the right honourable gentleman? The right honourable gentleman said that he wanted to do new trade deals. Now he wants to be in the customs union. At one stage, the right honourable gentleman was asked about his view on free movement. He said, Labour is not wedded to freedom of movement for EU citizens as a point of principle, but nor do we rule it out. So he can't even agree with himself on his own position.
I'm not quite sure who the Prime Minister is listening to, but she may have heard... She may have heard from the National Farmers Union that says it will be an Armageddon scenario. The TUC says a no-deal Brexit would be devastating for working people. The EU's chief negotiator and President Macron both seem to have categorically ruled out the Prime Minister's Chequers proposals. So we're now at a critical point. Can the Prime Minister tell the House if she believes a deal will be reached by the agreed deadline of October? That's October 2018, not any other one.
I say to the right honourable gentleman, we are working for a good deal. We're still working, as are the European Union, for the timetable that was set of October, because we're leaving the European Union on the 29th of March 2019. We will need to pass legislation in this House prior to our leaving the European Union. But he talks about no deal, and he talks about a deal. I'll tell him what would be bad for this country. That would be signing up to deal at any price whatsoever, which is the position of the Labour Party. That would destroy jobs. That would be bad for the British people.
Jeremy Corbyn! Yesterday, the Brexit Secretary admitted there had been some slippage. Today, Lord King condemned the incompetence of the preparation, saying it beggars belief that the 6th biggest economy in the world should get itself into that position. The Prime Minister has repeatedly said that no deal is better than a bad deal. But no deal is a bad deal. And everyone from the CBI to the TUC to her own Chancellor are telling her the same thing. The Chequers proposal is dead, already ripped apart by her own MPs. When will the Prime Minister publish a real plan that survives contact with her Cabinet and with reality? Those are, of course, two very separate concepts. When will we get proposals that put jobs and the economy ahead of the survival of herself and her own government?
We have published a plan that we are discussing with the European Union that ensures that we deliver on the vote of the British people, that ensures that we bring an end to free movement, that we come out of the CAP, come out of the common fisheries policy, no longer send vast amounts of money to the EU every year, no longer have the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice here in this country, that we don't have a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and we don't have a border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. What I'm doing is negotiating a Brexit deal for Britain. I'm making sure that the economy works for everyone. I'm building a stronger, fairer country. What is the right honourable gentleman doing? He's trying to change his party so anti-Semites can call the creation of Israel racist. And he should be ashamed of himself.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware of the campaign to extend the Borders Railway from Tweedbank to Hoyk, Newcastleton and on to Carlisle. This will provide a huge boost to the local economy and will help demonstrate what Scotland's two governments can do for my region. So what will the Prime Minister do to ensure there's sufficient resource in the Borderlands growth deal to allow this project to move forward?
Can I say to my honourable friend that I understand the importance to partners across the region of the campaign and the proposal that he has referred to. I'm sure he understands this is a devolved transport issue, but I would certainly encourage all parties that are involved to come to a workable solution and to ensure the best outcome for the entire region, because this can bring great benefits. And in addition to the point he made about the Borderlands growth deal, can I assure him that the UK and Scottish governments will continue to work in partnership to deliver that deal?
Ian Blackford. Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I congratulate Scotland and England in qualifying for the World Cup. All of us in Scotland are immensely proud of our Scottish women's team. Mr Speaker, when the Tories introduced Thatcher's poll tax in the 1980s, Scotland was used as a guinea pig. The Scottish Tories paid a price for their folly. They were wiped off the political map of Scotland. The Prime Minister's Chequers plan is even more unpopular than the poll tax. Why is the Prime Minister gambling with Scotland's future by taking us out of the EU against her will with her disastrous Chequers plan?
The only people who are gambling with Scotland's future are the Scottish National Party, who want to take Scotland out of the United Kingdom.
Well, that was no answer to the question. I should remind the Prime Minister it's Prime Minister's question. Mr Speaker, Michel Barnier has said that the Chequers plan is not acceptable. Mervyn King has called the government's preparations incompetent. Prime Minister, your Chequers plan is as dead as a dodo. With the clock ticking down, will the Prime Minister now finally concede that backing the single market and customs union is the only option to protect jobs, to protect the economy and to protect the Good Friday Agreement?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that we have put forward a proposal under the Chequers plan that protects jobs, that protects livelihoods, that ensures that we deliver on the vote of the British people, that ensures that we deliver on no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and maintain the union of the United Kingdom. Michel Barnier has put forward another proposal which keeps Northern Ireland in the customs union and the single market, which is a free trade agreement only for Great Britain, which creates a border down the Irish Sea. I have said, and I've said that it is unacceptable to me as Prime Minister. I believe there is no British Prime Minister who would find that deal acceptable that is being proposed there. We're negotiating on the Chequers deal. It delivers for the United Kingdom. It delivers for the people of the whole of the United Kingdom.
Eddie Hugh.
Mr Speaker, Walsall Manor Hospital serves many of my constituents and it desperately needs a new and extended A&E department. With other hospitals in the Black Country supporting their bid, can the Prime Minister assure me that some of the £20 billion additional funding for the NHS is coming to Walsall to improve A&E provision?
Can I say to my honourable friend that we are committed to providing the local NHS with the funding they need. We have, as he knows, announced over £3.9 billion of new additional capital funding for the NHS up to 2022-23. We announced that last year. The majority support the implementation of plans from local communities. I understand that the Walsall Healthcare NHS Trust have resubmitted an application for the £36.2 million of funding in July for the Walsall Manor Hospital Emergency Department. The Department of Health and Social Care expect the successful schemes to be announced in the autumn, but my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will be pleased to meet my honourable friend to discuss his campaign.
Brendan O'Hara. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Rural Scotland, including my Argyll and Bute constituency, is facing a depopulation crisis, a crisis that will be exacerbated by Brexit. Last week, Cleland Snedden, the Chief Executive of Argyll and Bute Council,
added his name to those calling for a more flexible, devolved and regional immigration policy, and offered Argyll and Bute as a test case and a pilot area to test this. Will the Prime Minister agree to meet with myself and the Chief Executive of Argyll and Bute to discuss the merits of such a proposal?
Can I welcome the honourable gentleman to asking a question here at the PMQs, but can I say to him, he's asked a question about a regional immigration policy, which is actually something which the Migration Advisory Committee looked at a while back and made very clear that this was not a situation that they felt the government should accept because of the practical problem, partly because of the practical problems in implementing that. When we put forward our proposals for the immigration policy for people coming from the European Union, we will be ensuring that we put forward proposals that are right for the whole of the United Kingdom.
Amber Rudd.
From PNR, these are all EU-wide databases, a lot of which the UK helped to shape, which keep us safe. While there is much debate here about the type of trading arrangement we will have with the EU, can I ask the Prime Minister for reassurance that there will still be the highest level of security arrangement with the EU as we leave the European Union, because any reduction in that is completely unacceptable to the people of the UK.
Can I say to my right honourable friend that she's absolutely right to highlight the importance of our security relationship with the EU. I remember the discussions, the debates that led to the establishment of the PNR directive. The White Paper does provide a comprehensive and ambitious vision for that future security relationship, and that's why we're proposing that security partnership to protect our shared law enforcement and criminal justice capabilities, facilitate continued cooperation and support our joint working on security issues such as counter-terrorism. And Michel Barnier has recognised the progress made in our discussions on security. So our focus should be on trying to obtain and define that ambitious and unprecedented partnership which will help to keep not just people here safe, but people across the whole of the EU safe.
It's law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The opening of the V&A Museum of Design next week in my city of Dundee is already attracting worldwide attention, expecting to have up to 500,000 visitors in its first year, and will drive millions of pounds into the local economy. The Prime Minister will also be aware that an announcement to confirm funding for the Tay-Cities deal is imminent and that improved connectivity is key to driving the prosperity of the Tay-City region. Therefore, as an air link to Dundee was part of Heathrow's successful bid for the third runway, will the Prime Minister today express a firm commitment for the introduction of a new direct air service to Dundee by 2021 and the associated investment required to secure this?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman, he's right to bring to the attention of the House both the D-side deal and the, as he says, the opening of the V&A in Dundee. These are important ways in which the UK government is working to ensure that support for Scotland and that those opportunities in relation to the Scottish economy. Another one of those is the fact that this is a government that has taken the decision to enable a third runway to go ahead at Heathrow, and we do expect when that happens that we will see better connectivity within the United Kingdom.
Henry Smith.
Speaker, this September is Blood Cancer Awareness Month, and therefore I'm delighted that yesterday it was announced the NHS will be providing innovative CAR T-cell immune therapy to under-25s, the first health system anywhere in Europe to do so. Can I seek assurances from my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, that a focus on blood cancer awareness and diagnosis and prevention will continue into the future?
Well, can I first of all commend my honourable friend for the work that he has done to champion the cause of blood cancer and raising a much greater awareness of this issue, and I can assure him that this will continue to be an issue that we want to press on and continue to raise awareness of. And like him, I'm pleased that the government has been able to make that the decision has been able to be made, as he referred to, was announced yesterday. But once again, I congratulate my honourable friend because he has personally campaigned on this and championed this cause.
Dr. Rupa Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister and I both have seats around Heathrow Airport, and both campaigned for years against its damaging effects on our constituents and its expansion. But when it came to the third runway vote, she shifted. If I can understand her change of heart because new facts emerged and it wasn't the same proposal as it was years ago, can she not apply the same logic and allow the electorate the final say on the final Brexit deal?
Very good. What a leader said.
Can I say to the honourable lady, an ingenious attempt to raise that Brexit issue. This Parliament overwhelmingly gave the decision to the British people as to whether to remain or leave the European Union. The British people voted. It is now up to this government, and I believe politicians across the whole House, to show our faith with the British people and deliver on their vote.
Damien Green. Time when this House will inevitably be spending a lot of time discussing Brexit. I think it's important we should concentrate on other issues, and for many families, their own children's future is a very immediate concern. With that in mind, does the Prime Minister agree that making sure as many children as possible grow up in a household where someone is working is not only the best way to provide a secure economic background for children, but also the best way of ensuring that future generations are prepared to play a full productive role in society?
Can I say I absolutely agree with my right honourable friend. Work is the best route out of poverty, but I think it's also important for the example it gives to children in households when they see a parent or parents working. I'm pleased to say that we now see that the levels in relation to children being brought up in workless households is at the lowest level that we've seen. This is very important. We know that 3/4 of children move out of poverty when their parents go into full-time work. For the example it shows, for the benefit it brings to those children, for the benefit it brings to the family, and the benefits to our society as a whole, ensuring that that the jobs are provided so those people can be in work for the future of their children is important.
Mr. Virendra Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister commit to securing and simplifying the future for people up and down the UK and pledge to protect the pensions dashboard?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that I believe that the responsible minister has made an announcement about the fact that the pensions dashboard will be going ahead, and I think there will be some piloting and a consultation on looking at that.
John Hayes.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister appreciates the plight of the poorest Britons, who, when they've loved and lost, struggle to be able to afford to provide a dignified and decent funeral, because she established the Children's Funeral Fund. Nevertheless, the grant available to the poorest people for this purpose has been frozen at £700 since 2003, and 30% of people get nothing at all. The Right Honourable Birkenhead's Select Committee recommended changes in 2016, which should meet me and him and others. It's not just our task or our duty, it's our mission to help to heal the broken-hearted.
Can I say to my right honourable friend that obviously he has raised an important and sensitive issue, and none of us want to see a situation where people are not able to afford to do that, what is a terrible task in that they have seen a loved one die, but to be able to give them a proper funeral and is important to families and to individuals. As he will know, the funeral expenses payments do continue to cover the necessary costs involved with funerals and cremations, and up to £700 for other funeral expenses, and some changes have been made to ensure that other contributions are not deducted from the funeral expenses payment, so that there is no change to that. Can I suggest to my right honourable friend that the position that he has put forward sounds to me like a budget submission, which he might wish to put forward to my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Meg Hillier.
Mr. Speaker, because of funding pressures, many schools are cutting short the school week. So what's the Prime Minister's message to parents whose children will be out of school for half a day a week?
Can I say to the honourable lady, first of all, I think we should all pay tribute to the work that our teachers and head teachers do across the country. And I'm pleased that 1.9 million more children are now in good or outstanding schools. We're backing schools with an extra 1.3 billion over the next 2 years. Per pupil funding being protected in real terms. But we're doing more than that. The Department for Education is working with schools to help reduce their non-staffing costs. That includes up to £1 billion through better procurement. That means that teachers will be able to do what they do best, which is carry on teaching.
Julian Knight.
Mr. Speaker, last Monday in Solihull, the lives of a mother and daughter, Kola Salim and Raneem Uday, were brought to an end after a double stabbing outside their home. I have met with Kola and Raneem's family, seen firsthand their quiet dignity, clear love for one another, and desire to see something good come from their loss. Would the Prime Minister join me in sending our thoughts and prayers to Kola and Raneem's family and thanking our emergency services, police liaison officers and the wider community of Solihull, which has shown great stoicism and heartfelt concern as this tragedy has unfolded?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I think the whole House will want to join me in sending our deepest sympathies to the families and loved ones of Kola Salim and Raneem Uday. This is a terrible tragedy. I'm sure my honourable friend understands I can't comment on the ongoing investigation that is taking place, but he is right to draw attention to the work of the emergency services. And indeed, I will join him in paying tribute not only to our emergency services, but also to the local community for the support that they have shown at this very difficult time.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the patients group End Our Pain, there has been a near total refusal of NHS trusts to back applications for medical cannabis. The Home Secretary has only paid lip service to 2 high-profile cases and not proposed a workable solution for other desperate children and adults across the UK. Now, the Prime Minister could show real leadership and solve this for hundreds of families, but will she?
To the Honourable Lady that, first of all, I offer deepest sympathies to those who are suffering severe conditions where other treatments have not been effective, and that these cannabis-based medicinal products have the potential to help. That's why the Home Secretary has announced that the law will be changed so specialist clinicians will be able to legally prescribe cannabis-based medicinal products to patients with an exceptional clinical need. Now, while that change is taking place, the expert panel has been established, an expert panel of clinicians, as an interim to ensure that treatment is safe and effective. So we're not just waiting for the legislation to change, we will change the law, but we've also put in place a procedure to ensure that those cases can be considered properly.
O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, honourable and right honourable members from across the House will join the people of Gibraltar in celebrating their National Day on the 10th of September. Will my right honourable friend confirm that it's Her Majesty's Government's full resolve that Gibraltar and its people will be fully included in all aspects of the withdrawal negotiations and future arrangements, and that no other party will have any veto on that?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I'm very happy to give him that reassurance and that commitment on behalf of this government. And can I say that I send best wishes to the people of Gibraltar for their celebrations on the 10th of September.
Yassine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, Bedford Maternity Unit closed its doors 6 times due to capacity and staffing issues. This is disgraceful. Will she admit now that starving our NHS of funds has had very devastating consequences? And will she now reinstate the nursing bursaries to address the shameful national shortage of 3,500 midwives and fund our NHS properly?
Can I simply point out to the honourable gentleman that health funding in his area will be £1.5 billion this year. And thanks to our funding commitments, this is an increase of over £60 million on the previous year, a cash increase of 4.2%. The Bedfordshire Clinical Commissioning Group will receive a cash increase of 4.34% on last year. We are putting extra money into the National Health Service, but more than that, we have committed future funding, a 5-year funding programme and a 10-year plan for the National Health Service to deliver the services that patients need.
Steve Baker.
Speaker, with Exit Day,
with exit day fast approaching, will my right honourable friend now give instructions to the whole of government that the first priority of every department must be domestic preparedness, whether we leave the EU with a deal or without?
Well, can I first of all commend my honourable friend for the work that he did when he was a minister on this particular issue? Can I assure him that the Brexit Department, the Department for Exiting the European Union, has indeed stepped up the work on preparations. We have 6,400 civil servants working on EU exit. There's an additional 1,850 recruited in the pipeline, so we can accelerate preparations as necessary. We've passed necessary laws such as the EU Withdrawal Act, an historic act passed in this House. Obviously, there are other pieces of legislation like the Sanctions Act, the Nuclear Safeguards Bill. We're publishing the technical notices on no-deal preparations. We are ensuring that our preparations are being made, and our preparations are made for every eventuality. We're working for a good deal. We prepare for every eventuality.
Smith. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester when he says, after losing 2,000 officers in 8 years, that the public have to accept that without more resources, it's impossible for the police to respond to crimes like car break-ins, antisocial behaviour, even property theft? Is that just the reality of policing under this government, or will the Prime Minister commit to give our police the funding they need?
I say to the honourable gentleman that obviously we understand the demand on policing, that is changing. It is becoming increasingly complex, and that's why, after speaking to forces in England and Wales, we provided a comprehensive funding settlement that will increase total investment in the police system by over £460 million in this year, 2018-19. And he might like to note that the force has a higher number of officers per head of population than the England and Wales average.
Alberto Costa. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this morning, my daughter Sophie, on her own merit, along with thousands of other school children, attended her first day in grammar school. What message does the Prime Minister have for my daughter Sophie and the thousands of other children who, as I say, on their own merit, secured a place at grammar school?
Well, can I say, first I would say well done to his daughter Sophie and those others. Secondly, I would say to Sophie and others, this is a country where how far you get on in life should depend on how hard you work and your talents and abilities. A good education is crucial to that. So I would say, enjoy your time at school, make the best of your time at school, because education is the key that unlocks the door to your future.
Mike Kane. Mr. Speaker, 25,000 jobs and 30 million passengers depend upon Manchester Airport in my constituency. But with no World Trade Organisation fallback position after Brexit, can the Prime Minister explain why the government has downgraded the possibility of an aviation sector deal?
Wow. Now, I can say to the honourable gentleman, not only are we, of course, making sure that the arrangements in relation to aviation will be what they should be when we leave the European Union, but we have been working with the aerospace sector generally and with aviation to ensure that as we put in place our modern industrial strategy, we see the jobs being not just maintained but also created across the country that provide those high skilled and well-paid jobs for people in these important sectors, and aviation is an important sector for the UK.
Andrea Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this year's local election, we elected my first Conservative councillor in the constituency, a wonderful lady called Nick, but since her election, she's been subjected to the most awful abuse by Labour and Momentum activists. Police have been called to her home several times, have hung around her home late at night. One has allegedly trolled her via his dead wife's social media account. Her special needs son is now too scared to leave the house. Would the Prime Minister join me in condemning this abhorrent intimidation of elected officials? Is this supposed to be the kinder, gentler politics of the Labour Party?
Can I first of all say to my honourable friend that I congratulate, I think it's Lynn, who for her election. Can I say I'm sorry that she has been subjected to this appalling series of attacks of various sorts since that election. Across our democracy, we have different opinions about what we want to achieve, sometimes about how we achieve what we want to achieve. But it is right that we are able to put those opinions forward. The democratic process means we put our views to the public and the public choose, as they have chosen my honourable friend's constituent to represent them on the council. And she should be able to get on with that job of representing her constituents, free of hatred and free of the abuse that she appears to be getting. And I say that this should be condemned on all sides of this House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It has been reported this morning that the Treasury and Number 10 are blocking plans for legally binding 3-year tenancies for private renters. This is of great concern to private renters in my constituency, including many families sending their children back to school this week, not knowing where they will be living this time next year. Will the Prime Minister make a clear promise to private tenants that they will be entitled to 3-year tenancies in law?
Can I say to the honourable lady that we are keen to support tenants to access longer, more secure tenancies, whilst also ensuring, obviously, landlords are able to recover their property when needed. The consultation on overcoming the barriers to longer tenancies in the private rented sector closed on the 26th of August. It considered the various barriers to longer tenancies and how to overcome them. It did propose a new 3-year tenancy model with a 6-month break clause. We asked for views on viability and on how that could be implemented. We are now analysing those responses and we will provide information on the next steps once we have done that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know my right honourable friend will be as concerned as me, and as I'm sure the whole House, to hear of and see the carcasses of nearly 90 elephants near a wildlife sanctuary in Botswana. This coincides with Botswana's anti-poaching unit being disarmed. Will she do more to tackle this scourge, including through our aid budget, to fund more rangers and more training through the MOD?
Can I say to my honourable friend that the whole issue of the illegal wildlife trade is a very important one. It was an issue that I touched on when I was in South Africa, in fact, in the presence of, and there was a minister from Botswana there at the time. We are holding a major conference later this year on the illegal wildlife trade, because we see it is important, and we are bringing people together across the international community to consider how we can further deal with this.
Chris Raine. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, prominent Tory Brexiteers promised that Wales would not lose out on funding if it voted to leave the EU. Wales has received £5.3 billion in European structural funds since 2000, the highest level in the UK and Europe. Will the Prime Minister guarantee here and now that Wales will not lose out on these fundings should the UK leave the EU?
First of all, can I say to the honourable gentleman, he says, should the UK leave the EU? The UK is leaving the European Union, and that will happen on the 29th of March next year. What we will be doing is, what we are doing, is reassessing, looking at the structural funds that have come from the European Union in the past. We are setting up the Shared Prosperity Fund. That will ensure that we're looking at disparities within regions and between and within nations and between the nations of the United Kingdom. And we are working to ensure that we have a system and a deal with the European Union for the future that works for the whole of the United Kingdom.
Gillian Keegan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like my right honourable friend, I have also recently returned from Africa, where I visited a refugee camp in Tanzania with Plan, witnessing the transformative impact of UK aid protecting women from sexual violence and giving children access to education. With the UN General Assembly fast approaching, can the Prime Minister outline what preparations she has made for the Global Compact on Refugees?
Can I say to my honourable friend that, yes, we are looking at it's not just us looking at what is being proposed in terms of the Global Compact for Refugees. We have actually been part of the discussions about what should be in that Global Compact for Refugees, and this partly reflects the speech that I gave, one of the speeches I gave when I was at UNGA in 2016, shortly after I became Prime Minister, about the need for us to look at, as internationally, how we deal with migration and refugees. And I want to see a better ability to differentiate between illegal economic migrants and refugees, because I think that by doing that, we will be able to ensure that we're providing the support necessary for refugees.
Mr. Vincent Cable.
Can the Prime Minister explain why the process by which European nationals acquire settled status requires 59 pages of guidance? Isn't this simply providing 59 ways of saying no in a continued hostile environment?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that the system, as he will know, was launched not that long ago. It's very clear. It's an online system. It's a simple system. We guarantee that that would be what we provided, and this is what we have delivered.
Exactly. Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wilkins is a central Scotland department store, and over the years has become something of an institution in Stirling, and it recently announced that it was to close. While the Scottish Government continued to delay any changes to the business rate system in Scotland, which is killing our high street, can the Prime Minister assure me that there will be some action to level the playing field between high street businesses and online sellers?
Can I say to my honourable friend that he's right to highlight the importance of using the tax system in a responsible way. This is very important. Businesses, it's right that businesses make a contribution to their local area through the business rates, but this should be as fair as possible. That's why we've improved the system and made changes worth over £10 billion to businesses, including taking 600,000 small businesses out of paying business rates altogether. Because Britain's retailers, be they high street shops or independent traders, are a crucial part of our economy. They create jobs, they inject billions into our economy, and I think all those responsible for these tax systems should deal with them responsibly and recognise the impact that the decisions they make have.
I think we should wrap up with a new young member seeking to make an early mark. Mr. Geoffrey Robinson.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware that next Wednesday, 12th of September, we have the committee stage for my private member's bill, organ donation deemed consent? I wish to thank her personally for the tremendous support she has given, and of course my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition. Her support and the government time and the Minister's support has been vital. Can she assure us she can sustain that support now through committee stage, in which case we can have it through the Commons procedures by the end of the year and have an act on the statute book early in the new year? An act I think the whole House would be pleased to see, an act whose sole purpose, Mr. Speaker, is to save, preserve, enhance lives. Thank you.
Say to the honourable gentleman that this is an important piece of legislation. As he says, it will make a difference to people's lives. And we have, as he said, given it our backing. We will continue to give this legislation our backing precisely because of the importance and the impact it will have on people.
Thank you. Order. Well, we are coming now to a statement of the Prime Minister. If the point of order relates to something that has happened during Prime Minister's questions, I will hear it. But if it's simply that it's convenient for the Honourable Lady, I'm afraid she'll have to wait till later.
Urgent matter that is happening and was developing during Prime Minister's questions, Mr. Speaker.
I'll give the Honourable Lady the benefit of the doubt while the Prime Minister consumes some water or otherwise. Very well. Point of order, Hannah Bardell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I seek your guidance. My constituent Kweku Adebole is facing imminent deportation to Ghana, where he hasn't lived since he was 4 years old. Despite his rehabilitation and reform since his release from prison, working for a number of UK universities and the Special Forces, the Prime Minister has not responded directly to the letters I have written to her and the points I have made. What can I do to ensure that she responds directly and reviews this decision?
The short and honest answer is the Honourable Lady can wait patiently and in egalitarian spirit, like every other member, for the opportunity to put a question to the Prime Minister at the appropriate time, rather than using the bogus device of a contrived point of order inappropriately to try to put her point on the record. But because I'm a decent and charitable soul, I'm happy to admire her ingenuity on this occasion, but I wouldn't encourage her to use this ruse too frequently. We'll leave it there. Statement, the Prime Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to update the House on the investigation into the attempted murder of Sergei and Yulia Skripal and the subsequent poisoning of Dawn Sturgis and Charlie Rowley earlier this year. This was a sickening and despicable act in which a devastatingly toxic nerve agent known as Novichok was used to attack our country. It left 4 people fighting for their lives and 1 innocent woman dead. And I know the thoughts of the whole House will be with the family of Dawn Sturgis in particular, following their tragic loss. In March, I set out for the House why the government concluded that the Russian state was culpable for the attempted murder of Mr. Skripal and his daughter. I also said that while we all share a sense of impatience to bring those responsible to justice, as a nation that believes in the rule of law, we would give the police the space and time to carry out their investigation properly. Since then, around 250 detectives have trawled through more than 11,000 hours of CCTV and taken more than 1,400 statements. Working around the clock, they have carried out painstaking and methodical work to ascertain exactly which individuals were responsible and the methods they used to carry out this attack. Mr. Speaker, this forensic investigation has now produced sufficient evidence for the Independent Director of Public Prosecutions to bring charges against 2 Russian nationals for the conspiracy to murder Sergei Skripal, the attempted murder of Sergei and Yulia Skripal and Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey, the use and possession of Novichok, and causing grievous bodily harm with intent to Yulia Skripal and Nick Bailey. This morning, the police have set out how the 2 Russian nationals travelled under the names of Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Bushirov, names the police believe to be aliases. They arrived at Gatwick Airport at 3 p.m. on Friday, the 2nd of March, having flown from Moscow on flight SU-2588. They travelled by train to London Victoria, then on to Waterloo, before going to the City Stay Hotel in Bow Road, East London. They stayed there on both Friday and Saturday evenings, and traces of Novichok were found in their hotel room. On Saturday, the 3rd of March, they visited Salisbury, arriving at approximately 2:25 p.m. and leaving less than 2 hours later at 4:10 p.m. The police are confident this was for reconnaissance of the Salisbury area. On Sunday, the 4th of March, they made the same journey, travelling by underground from Bow to Waterloo Station at approximately 8:05 a.m. before continuing by train to Salisbury. The police have today released CCTV footage of the 2 men, which clearly places them in the immediate vicinity of the Skripal's house at 11:58 a.m., which the police say was moments before the attack. They left Salisbury and returned to Waterloo, arriving at approximately 4:45 p.m. and boarded the Underground at approximately 6:30 p.m. to Heathrow, from where they returned to Moscow on flight SU-2585, departing at 10:30 p.m. Mr. Speaker, this hard evidence has enabled the Independent Crown Prosecution Service to conclude they have a sufficient basis on which to bring charges against these 2 men for the attack in Salisbury. The same 2 men are now also the prime suspects in the case of Dawn Sturgis and Charlie Rowley too. There is no other line of inquiry beyond this. And the police today have formally linked the attack on the Skripals and the events in Amesbury, such that it now forms one investigation. There are good reasons for doing so. Our own analysis, together with yesterday's report from the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, has confirmed that the exact same chemical nerve agent was used in both cases. There is no evidence to suggest that Dawn and Charlie may have been deliberately targeted, but rather were victims of the reckless disposal of this agent. The police have today released further details of the small glass counterfeit perfume bottle and box discovered in Charlie Rowley's house, which was found to contain this nerve agent. And the manner in which the bottle was modified leaves no doubt it was a cover for smuggling the weapon into the country and for the delivery method for the attack against the Skripal's front door. Mr. Speaker, the police investigation into the poisoning of Dawn and Charlie is ongoing, and the police are today appealing for further information. But were these two suspects within our jurisdiction, there would be a clear basis in law for their arrest for murder. Mr. Speaker, we repeatedly asked Russia to account for what happened in Salisbury in March, and they have replied with obfuscation and lies. This is including trying to pass the blame for the attack onto terrorists, onto our international partners, and even onto the future mother-in-law of Yulia Skripal. They even claimed that I myself invented Novichok. Their attempts to hide the truth by pushing out a deluge of disinformation simply reinforces their culpability. As we made clear in March, only Russia had the technical means, operational experience and motive to carry out the attack. Novichok nerve agents were developed by the Soviet Union in the 1980s under a program codenamed Foliant. Within the past decade, Russia has produced and stockpiled small quantities of these agents, long after it signed the Chemical Weapons Convention. And during the 2000s, Russia commenced a program to test means of delivering nerve agents, including by application to door handles. We were right to say in March that the Russian state was responsible. And now we have identified the individuals involved, we can go even further. Mr. Speaker, just as the police investigation has enabled the CPS to bring charges against the two suspects, so the security and intelligence agencies have carried out their own investigations into the organisation behind this attack. Based on this work, I can today tell the House that based on a body of intelligence, the government has concluded that the two individuals named by the police and CPS are officers from the Russian Military Intelligence Service, also known as the GRU. The GRU is a highly disciplined organisation with a well-established chain of command. So this was not a rogue operation. It was almost certainly also approved outside the GRU at a senior level of the Russian state. Mr. Speaker, the House will appreciate that I cannot go into details about the work of our security and intelligence agencies, but we will be briefing opposition leaders and others on Privy Council terms, and also giving further detail to the Intelligence and Security Committee. Let me turn to our response to this appalling attack and the further knowledge we now have about those responsible. First, with respect to the two individuals, as the Crown Prosecution Service and Police announced earlier today, we have obtained a European arrest warrant and will shortly issue an Interpol red notice. Of course, Russia has repeatedly refused to allow its nationals to stand trial overseas, citing a bar on extradition in its constitution. So, as we found following the murder of Alexander Litvinenko, any formal extradition request in this case would be futile. But should either of these individuals ever again travel outside Russia, we will take every possible step to detain them, to extradite them, and to bring them to face justice here in the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, this chemical weapons attack on our soil was part of a wider pattern of Russian behaviour that persistently seeks to undermine our security and that of our allies around the world. They fomented conflict in the Donbass, illegally annexed Crimea, repeatedly violated the national airspace of several European countries, and mounted a sustained campaign of cyber espionage and election interference. They were behind a violent attempted coup in Montenegro, and a Russian-made missile launched from territory held by Russian-backed separatists brought down MH17. We must step up our collective effort to protect ourselves in response to this threat, and that is exactly what we have done since the attack in March, both domestically and collectively with our allies. We've introduced a new power to detain people at the UK border to determine whether they are engaged in hostile state activity. We've introduced the Magnitsky Amendment to the Sanctions and Money Laundering Act in response to the violation of human rights. and we have radically stepped up our activity against illicit finance entering our country. We also expelled 23 Russian diplomats who had been identified as undeclared Russian intelligence officers, fundamentally degrading Russian intelligence capability in the UK for years to come. And in collective solidarity and in recognition of the shared threat posed to our allies, 28 other countries, as well as NATO, joined us in expelling a total of over 150 Russian intelligence officers, the largest collective expulsion ever. Since then, the EU agreed a comprehensive package to tackle hybrid threats. The G7 agreed a rapid response mechanism to share intelligence on hostile state activity. NATO has substantially strengthened its collective deterrence, including through a new cyber operations centre. And the US has announced additional sanctions against Russia for the Salisbury attack. Mr. Speaker, our allies acted in good faith, and the painstaking work of our police and intelligence agencies over the last 6 months further reinforces that they were right to do so. Together, we will continue to show that those who attempt to undermine the international rules-based system cannot act with impunity. We will continue to press for all of the measures agreed so far to be fully implemented, including the creation of a new EU chemical weapons sanction regime. But we will not stop there. We will also push for new EU sanctions regimes against those responsible for cyber attacks and gross human rights violations, and for new listings under the existing regime against Russia. And we will work with our partners to empower the OPCW to attribute chemical weapons attacks to other states beyond Syria. Most significantly, Mr. Speaker, what we have learned from today's announcement is the specific nature of the threat from the Russian GRU. We know that the GRU has played a key part in malign Russian activity in recent years. And today we have exposed their role behind the despicable chemical weapons attack on the streets of Salisbury. The actions of the GRU are a threat to all our allies and to all our citizens. And on the basis of what we have learnt in the Salisbury investigation and what we know about this organisation more broadly, we must now step up our collective efforts specifically against the GRU. We're increasing our understanding of what the GRU is doing in our countries, shining a light on their activities, exposing their methods and sharing them with our allies, just as we have done with Salisbury. And Mr. Speaker, while the House will appreciate that I cannot go into details, together with our allies, we will deploy the full range of tools from across our national security apparatus in order to counter the threat posed by the GRU. I have said before, and I say again now, that the UK has no quarrel with the Russian people. And we continue to hold out hope that we will one day, once again, enjoy a strong partnership with the government of this great nation. As a fellow permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, we will continue to engage Russia on topics of international peace and security. But we will also use these channels of communication to make clear there can be no place in any civilised international order for the kind of barbaric activity which we saw in Salisbury in March. Finally, Mr. Speaker, let me pay tribute to the fortitude of the people of Salisbury, Amesbury and the surrounding areas, who have faced such disruption to their daily lives over the past 6 months. Let me once again thank the outstanding efforts of the emergency services and National Health Service in responding to these incidents. And let me thank all those involved in the police and intelligence community for their tireless and painstaking work, which has led to today's announcement. Mr. Speaker, back in March, Russia sought to sow doubt and uncertainty about the evidence we presented to this House, and some were minded to believe them. Today's announcement shows that we were right. We were right to act against the Russian state in the way we did, and we are right now to step up our efforts against the GRU. We will not tolerate such barbaric attacks against our country. And together with our allies, this government will continue to do whatever is necessary to keep our people safe. And I commend this statement to the House.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of her statement and for the security briefings that we've received. Our thoughts are today with the family of Dawn Sturgis and with Charlie Rowley, who's still recovering from his ordeal. And we're obviously very sad at the death of Dawn and send condolences to her partner and her family. And we send our best wishes too to Sergei and Yulia Skripal for a very full recovery. The use of military nerve agents on the streets of Britain is an outrage and beyond reckless. 6 months after the attack, Salisbury and its people are still suffering the after effects of this attack. I found that when I visited the city earlier this summer. There was an eerie calm hanging over the city, and on a summer's evening, a large park cordoned off for security purposes so the police can continue their investigations created a very strange and very eerie atmosphere. And I think we should show some sympathy for the people of Salisbury and what they've gone through, and I know the Prime Minister has done that in her statement. I commend the police for their superhuman efforts in forensically trawling through hours and hours of information in helping to identify the suspects. Given today's announcement on the decision to charge 2 Russian citizens with responsibility for this appalling attack, what steps is the Prime Minister taking to secure cooperation from the Russian government in bringing them to trial? The OPCW's This is a serious matter, Mr. Speaker, and I think they should be brought to trial. The OPCW's findings of the evidence that Novichok was used in Salisbury are a stark reminder that the international community must strengthen its resolve to take effective action against the possession, spread or use of chemical weapons in any circumstances. No government anywhere can or should put itself above the international law. The Prime Minister previously outlined that the type of nerve agent used was identified as being manufactured in Russia. The use of this nerve agent is a clear violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention and therefore a breach of international law. Mr. Speaker, based on the OPCW findings, the Russian government must give a full account of how this nerve agent came to be used in the UK. Will the Prime Minister continue to pursue a formal request for evidence from the Russian government under Article 9(2)? It is in the interest of the peace and security of all people and all countries that no government plays fast and loose with the international human rights rules-based system. Can the Prime Minister update the House on what contacts, if any, she's had with the Russian government more recently to hold it to account? Our response as a country must be guided by the rule of law, support for international agreements and respect for human rights, even and perhaps especially when other countries don't respect those agreements. I'll say more on that in one moment. But I want to assure the Prime Minister and the House that we will back any further reasonable and effective actions, whether against Russia as a state or the GRU as an organisation. And I would encourage the Prime Minister to seek the widest possible European and international consensus for this to maximise its impact. Mr. Speaker, in 2015, the United Nations set up the Organisation for Prevention of Chemical Weapons, a UN joint investigative mechanism, but due to no agreement in the UN Security Council, there is no international mechanism responsible for attributing chemical weapons attacks to any specific perpetrators. So, Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister outline what efforts the UK has made at the UN Security Council to overcome this impasse so that the OPCW will be allowed to provide clarity and attribution to the violators of international chemical weapons law? While we all hope that our country will never suffer such attacks again, can the Prime Minister outline what lessons have been learned by police and health service staff and what training has been given to both police and health service staff in dealing with a nerve agent attack? This is no way a criticism, indeed it's a congratulations to them on the way that they performed after the attack in Salisbury. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, we utterly condemn the appalling attacks. We commend the police and security services for their diligence in investigating this appalling crime, and we will support any reasonable action to bring those responsible to justice and to take further action against Russia for its failure to cooperate with this investigation.
Prime Minister.
Can I first of all say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, as I said in my statement, that I'm sure all members of this House join both of us in saying to the people of Salisbury, they have been through, and the Amesbury and the surrounding area, they have been through terrible disruption in the recent months, and we commend the dignity and calm way in which they have approached this and in which they have dealt with this. The Right Honourable Gentleman asked me what we had done in relation to approaching the Russian government on the question of the bringing these two individuals to justice. As I said in my statement, we're issuing an Interpol Red Notice, we've issued a European arrest warrant, but as we saw in the case of Alexander Litvinenko, Russia does not allow its citizens to be extradited to face justice in other countries. And therefore, as I think the phrase I used in my statement was that an attempt at extradition would be, extradition request would be futile. What we have done is repeatedly asked Russia to account for what happened in Salisbury in March, and what they have done is responded with obfuscation and lies. We want Russia to act as a responsible member of the international community. That means that it must account for the reckless and outrageous actions of the GRU, which is part of the Russian state. This is a decision that would have been taken at a level outside the GRU and at a high level in the Russian state. They must rein in the activities of the GRU, and they must recognise there can be no place in any civilised international order for the kind of barbaric activity which we saw in Salisbury in March. The Right Honourable Gentleman asks me about the OPCW and the United Nations Security Council. We have been working through the OPCW, and I'm pleased to say that we had an overwhelming vote on a proposal that we and others had put forward earlier in the summer in relation to strengthening the OPCW's ability to attribute to those who are responsible for the use of chemical weapons. There are further discussions to take place within the OPCW on that issue, but I hope that the whole international community, and I would hope some of those who previously were cautious about accepting what we had said in March about the responsibility for this, will now see the clear responsibility that lies at the doors of Russia and will act accordingly. And on the United Nations Security Council, it is right that the United Nations Security Council has not been able to come together to agree an arrangement for attribution on the use of chemical weapons. Why has that been? Russia vetoes any attempt to do that. So we will work through the OPCW. We will continue to give the very clear message that states cannot and people cannot use chemical weapons with impunity. We will maintain and do all we can to reinforce the international rules-based order in relation to the use of chemical weapons. And I and this government, and I'm sure other members of this House, will be very clear about the culpability of the Russian state in the attack on Salisbury.
Mr. Boris Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for her statement. I think the whole House will have noted what I'm afraid was the somewhat weaselly language of the Leader of the Opposition in failing to condemn what is now, I think, incontrovertible in the eyes of all right-thinking people, the involvement of the Russian state at the highest level in the Salisbury poisonings. And will my right honourable friend confirm that we will be asking that these two individuals are produced for justice by Russia, and will she be joining and stepping up our diplomatic activity, our countermeasures, our targeted sanctions, so that the whole community, international community, can show their repugnance at what Russia has done in a way that I'm afraid the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, has signally failed to do today.
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, can I thank him for the comments that he made, and obviously he was Foreign Secretary when the attack took place and worked, as I did, with the international community in relation to the response from that international community. I understand, the CPS does not have a policy of requesting extradition from those states whose constitution bars that possibility of extradition. What we are clear about, and that's why we've issued the notices that are available to us in the Interpol Red Notice and the European Arrest Warrant, that, as I said in my statement, if these two individuals step outside Russia, then we will take every step possible to ensure that they are detained and are brought to face justice here in the United Kingdom. And on the other points that my right honourable friend makes, we will indeed be stepping up our activity across the broad range of our capabilities and what is available to us across our national security apparatus to ensure that we are taking every effort to deal with malign state activity and, in particular, as I said in my statement, the activity of the GRU.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We on these benches welcome the Prime Minister's statement and the news that we have now been able to identify the suspects following the Salisbury attack. The attack on Mr. Skripal and his daughter was an unlawful use of force by the Russian state on the streets of Salisbury. We now have the evidence that absolutely, unequivocally confirms that case. And of course, whilst our thoughts are with the Skripals and their recovery, we ought to today remember the sad death of Don Sturgis and Charlie Rowley, who is recovering from the attacks that he suffered from. Mr. Speaker, the news of the arrest warrants today will send a clear message that all of us here will not tolerate the behaviour from the Russians that took place in Salisbury. And whilst I agree with the remarks of the Prime Minister and the actions that are open to us, and that if the two individuals ever leave Russia, that they face the threat of arrest, I think working with our international partners, we really ought to put the maximum pressure on Russia to turn these two individuals over. They must face trial here in the United Kingdom. There must always be a robust response to the use of terror on our streets. Let me reassure the Prime Minister that the Scottish National Party is fully committed to working constructively with the government to ensure that we do all we can to protect the public. I'm sure that others will join me across the House in extending our gratitude to the members of the security services and the police who have worked to ensure that these announcements today have been made. The dedication and commitment to rooting out these criminals is absolutely critical to securing the safety of citizens here. And on behalf of the Scottish National Party, I send my sincerest thanks for all their efforts. Mr. Speaker, the threat from Russia must always be met by a united front from all of us together, standing in solidarity against the abuse of power. Only together will we take on the abuse of state power by the Kremlin, and only then can we ensure that we work towards a peaceful future for citizens across the United Kingdom and beyond. It is right that the Prime Minister has brought to us this statement today, and I'm grateful for that. I do look forward to justice being done. It must be done. I would like to ask the Prime Minister if she could also provide us with an update on the government's actions to tackle Russia's abuse of Scottish limited partnerships. SLPs have been used to move more than $88 billion from Russia in just 4 years, according to our own government. All action must be taken to stand up to this abuse of power and show that we are prepared to take Russia on for human rights abuses, for money laundering. We will and we must, together, take effective action.
Prime Minister.
Can I first of all thank the right honourable gentleman for the tone of his response, and also thank him for the support that he has shown for the government's work. He mentioned the emergency services, and I again repeat, as I said, but as he has also said, our immense thanks to all those in the emergency services, the police, our security and intelligence agencies, and the National Health Service who've responded to these incidents that took place, to the work that the police and the intelligence agencies have been done that have enabled us to be in the position of identifying these two individuals and issuing the Interpol Red Notice and the European Arrest Warrant. Can I also recognise that in the clean-up that took place, the armed forces were also present, and their expertise was available, and we're grateful to them them too. He asked about the Scottish Limited Partnerships. The Home Office has been working with the Business Department in looking at this issue. It is the intention to bring legislation forward to cover a range of abuses, and I'm sure that the Security Minister would be happy to speak to the Right Honourable Gentleman about that. Can I also thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his understanding and acceptance of what I have said in my statement today about the role of the GRU and the culpability of the Russian state. Can I thank him for his clear condemnation of the Russian state?
Exactly.
Can I say I would only wish that that clear condemnation would be possible from the leaders of all parties in this House.
Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend is absolutely right in her identification of the Russian state.
Yeah.
What we are at the moment is the victim of state terrorism by a state which is in fact run as a gangster organisation and which threatens us all and has done it repeatedly on the international stage and is wholly outside the international rules-based system. And I greatly agree with her and commend the work of our police and our security services in elucidating the surrounding circumstances around this appalling act. I look forward on behalf of my committee, the Intelligence and Security Committee, to further details relating to the background. But in the meantime, does my right honourable friend agree that we are going to have to look carefully at the ease with which Russian nationals on Russian passports can come in and out of this country? Obviously, as a free country, we wish to facilitate exchange of people, but it clearly is going to become a pertinent issue when it becomes so apparent that the system is being abused by the Russian state for the purpose of sending hoods and murderers to come into our country to kill our citizens and those who are protected by us.
Prime Minister.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his comments, and we will indeed, as I said in my statement, be ensuring that further detail is available for the Intelligence and Security Committee. The individuals, as I understand it, came into the United Kingdom under valid passports that were issued by the Russian government. I think we have already stepped up our powers through the introduction of the ability to be able to stop people at port, to consider and investigate whether they are involved in hostile state activity. Of course, we, on a continual basis, look to ensure that we have all the powers necessary to deal with these issues, and my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will continue to do that.
Sir Vincent Cable.
Can I give strong support to the Prime Minister for her condemnation of the Russian state? But since our seriousness will be judged by actions rather than words, can she explain how many of the Russian oligarchs, who we know to be cronies of the Russian regime and have wealth in the UK, have had their assets seized under unexplained wealth orders following the powerful example of the United States?
Can I say to the Right Honourable, can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his opening remarks on this issue and for his reference to the role of the Russian state in this, in what happened in Salisbury. The National Crime Agency has stepped up its activity in relation to illicit finance. A considerable amount of work is being undertaken in relation to that. Of course, these are matters that are operational matters for the National Crime Agency. We don't comment, as the Right Honourable Gentleman will know, on individual cases, but I can assure him that the work that is going on in relation to these matters has been stepped up considerably since what happened in March.
Amber Rudd.
Mr. Speaker, can I join the Prime Minister in congratulating the security services and the police services for their brilliant work in arriving at these conclusions? 2 named Russian intelligence officers. Nothing could be more conclusive. It is the nature of the Russian propaganda machine that they will always try and throw smoke up to confuse us. But does she share my hope that the clear evidence here will make it clear to all people who doubted what we said before, and I think particularly of the opposition front bench, that when the security services lead us in this direction, they know what they are doing?
Minister.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, first of all, can I thank her for the role that she played as Home Secretary and the visits that she made to Salisbury, particularly on this issue. But she is absolutely right. There were those who, when I first presented what had happened in Salisbury in March to this House, questioned the point that we had made, questioned the statement that I had made about the involvement of the Russian state. Now we have clearly seen the police have identified 2 individuals. The CPS, the independent CPS, has laid charges against those 2 individuals. We have clearly identified a link with the Russian military intelligence agency, the GRU. And it is clear that permission for an act of this sort would have been taken outside the GRU and at a senior level within the Russian state. I think it is incumbent on all those who were sceptical back in March to recognise the evidence that has been laid before this House and before the public and recognise the involvement of the Russian state and condemn them wholeheartedly.
Yvette Cooper.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for her immensely serious statement and pay tribute to the impressive forensic work of our police and intelligence agencies. They and the government have support from across the House for their work in the face of this vile chemical attack, in the face of this threat from the GRU and the operations of the Russian state, which we must unreservedly condemn, both for this chemical attack but also the wider propaganda and the online spread to undermine democracy and truth. But Alexander Litvinenko was murdered 12 years ago, and she will know there were then long delays in setting up an inquiry, in taking action against assets of suspects who were identified and those linked to them. Has she considered the lessons from the Litvinenko case, and what further measures is she ensuring take place now around those suspects and those who may be linked to them, so we learn those lessons too?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her comments and for her support for the police, for the intelligence agencies and the work that the government has been doing in relation to this particular issue. Yes, we did look at the Alexander Litvinenko case, at the lessons that we needed to learn as a government from the response to that and the action that was taken in that. I think we saw and we acted accordingly. I think one of the key differences, of course, that we saw in March from what happened in the Litvinenko case was the very strong international response to what had happened here in Salisbury. As I say, the biggest single number of expulsions ever that has taken place of Russian personnel of this sort. But we will continue, obviously, to look at this matter. We will be looking at the issues of the further action that can be taken. As I said, we will be using all the tools in our national security apparatus in order to be able to do that. It isn't, of course, possible for me to go into detail on some of those matters, but I'm sure it would be possible to give the Right Honourable Lady a briefing on Privy Council terms.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
May I urge the Prime Minister to make more of the passage of a law in July 2006 by the Russian Federation Parliament, specifically enabling and empowering its president to order the assassination of Russia's enemies abroad. As we know, this happened only weeks before the killing of Litvinenko. And if she really wants to send a strong message to the Russian government, will she have a quiet word with the Chancellor to enable defence to get the uplift in the defence budget that it needs if further cuts in our ability to deter Russia are not to be inflicted by the budget?
Can I say to my honourable friend that he is right, of course, to highlight the law that was passed in Russia in 2006 that does give that ability to order assassinations outside of the Russian state. And he's right to point that out. I think it's an important fact for people to recognise that is the background against which they are operating and we see happening today. Can I also say to my honourable friend, and I suspect he won't be surprised at the response I'm giving him in relation to this matter, of course we are looking at the modernising defence programme. As we look at the threat that is posed by Russia, at the threats that we see from a whole variety of other sources as well, what is important is that we look not just at the conventional way in which we have dealt with those threats, but we recognise the diverse and varied way in which malign state activity is undertaken today. As I referenced, for example, in my statement, we see a lot of propaganda and cyber activity taking place by the Russian state. We need to make sure that we have all the tools at our disposal, and that will run across a number of parts of government and not simply in the Ministry of Defence.
Pat McFadden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first duty of anyone occupying the office she holds is to protect the public and to be clear-eyed about the threats that the country faces. Can I thank her for her statement today and echo the praise that she and other members have given to the police and intelligence services for the tremendous work that's been done in enabling her to come to the conclusions which she has shared with the House today. But given her responsibilities, can I ask her why she thinks the Russian state authorised such a barbaric operation on the streets of the UK, this state-sanctioned attempted murder?
Well, can I thank the right honourable gentleman for his opening comments and for his praise for the police and intelligence agencies. As I said, 250 detectives trawling through 11,000 hours of CCTV, over 1,400 statements. This was a very significant investigation that has taken place. And then, of course, has been the work of the intelligence agencies, which I referred to in my statement as well. I think, it is not for me to describe what was the motivation behind the Russian state in relation to this issue. I suspect that they wanted to give a message to those Russians who were living elsewhere, who had been involved in matters relating to the Russian state, and that is the only reason that I can assume that lay behind what they wanted to do. But it is up to the Russians to explain what happened in Salisbury. I have said consistently, I did it in March, I've said it again this afternoon, we've said it since, that the Russian state needs to explain what happened in Salisbury. All we've had is obfuscation and lies.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, in the light of her statement, would my right honourable friend agree that for the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe to change its rules at the behest of the Secretary-General to facilitate the readmission of the delegation of the Russian Federation would make an absolute nonsense of the Convention on Human Rights? And would she agree that it's incumbent upon the Council of Europe and all other international bodies to send a clear message to the Russian Federation that human rights is not an a la carte menu?
Well, can I thank our friend for the very real issue that he raises? Can I say, of course, the government will be looking to raise this issue in international fora in which we are able to do so, but I think he is absolutely right. I would hope that this information obviously will be provided to the Council of Europe, and I hope this will make them think again about the steps that they are proposing. And as my honourable friend says, human rights are not an a la carte menu from which you can pick and choose.
Rashanara Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I also commend the police and security services for all their work on this very serious issue. This morning, my colleague, the Honourable Member for Poplar and Limehouse, and I were assured that local people don't face a threat, and the local hotel in Bow, where the perpetrators stayed, has been checked. But can I, and that they are safe. But can I ask the Prime Minister to assure us that further reassurance will be provided, and that lessons will be learned, and that local police who have to work in partnership with the security and counter-terrorism officers must be supported in dealing with this new kind of threat that cuts across different boroughs and different parts of the country?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, obviously she raises an issue that is an important one, and it's right that we're able to give that reassurance. In relation to the hotel that the individuals stayed in, it is very clear the Chief Medical Officer has also given a statement this morning about the issues relating to public health, and has made very clear about, in that statement, about the low risk that pertains there. As regards the hotel, samples were taken from the room as a precautionary measure, and that was first happened, the contamination at the Novichok was identified at the initial stage when that hotel room was identified as being below that which would cause concern for public health. and then further samples have been taken and have come back negative. And following these tests, the experts deemed that the room was safe and it posed no risk to the public. I believe the Chief Medical Officer has indicated that anybody who stayed in the room between the 4th of March and the 4th of May, who, had they been affected, would have been affected by now. No, there have been no reports of any health effect on anybody during that period. But reference has made, people may wish to get in touch with the investigatory team to be reassured on this matter. But also, she mentioned other elements. They're very clear. The Chief Medical Officer's made clear that staff who operated, maintained and cleaned the transport systems are safe. There's no risk to members of the public who travelled alongside the individuals between the 2nd of March and the 4th of March, or on those who used the transport system afterwards.
Bob Seeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our right honourable friend has mentioned the 2006 Russian law, which would surely logically assume that the man who allowed this assassination attempt to happen was the head of the Russian state, Vladimir Putin. But the GRU is not a new organisation, and is the Prime Minister aware of the GRU's involvement as the lead agency in the Crimean annexation, as a critical agency but not the only one in the East Ukrainian war? The GRU General Orion, who was the senior man at the time in the shooting down of the MH17, and the very close and short command chain which allegedly exists between the GRU and the Russian presidency. Thank you.
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend, and I know that he has himself personally worked tirelessly in ensuring that the activities of the Russian state, we are all aware of the activities of the Russian state and the threat that they pose. Obviously, we've specifically identified the two individuals in relation to the GRU. As I've said, the GRU has had, as he's acknowledged, involvement elsewhere. There are other parts of the Russian state that has had involvement in malign state activity elsewhere as well. And as I said in my statement, it is almost certain that a decision of this sort would have been taken outside the GRU and at a senior level.
Mike Gapes.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister referred in her comprehensive and detailed statement to cooperation with our European Union partners and the European Union chemical weapons sanction regime. Can she assure me and the whole country that we will continue to work closely with our European Union partners as the closest possible security and intelligence and sanctions cooperation will be necessary, whatever happens in March next year?
Can I give the honourable member that reassurance? We recognise the importance of working with our European partners on these matters of security. It's why in the proposals for our future relationship we have set proposals out for an ambitious and a comprehensive security partnership which covers cooperating together across a range of areas, continued access for the UK to certain instruments that can be helpful in dealing with these matters, such as the European arrest warrant. And indeed, in another area where we have taken our own powers such that after March next year we'll be able to have our own individual sanctions regime, we would want to continue to cooperate with our European partners as well on those issues too.
Mark Francois.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The GRU is Russian military intelligence. Its operatives are recruited almost exclusively from the Russian military. It reports to the Russian General Staff, via then to the Defence Ministry, and on a very short leash to the Kremlin. So we should understand the enormity of what has happened here. Absolutely. British citizens have been murdered, or almost murdered, on British soil by two highly trained Russian soldiers.
Absolutely.
Can I suggest that in responding to this heinous attack, we should now target the GRU, both in our country and again among our allies, and seek specific expulsions of GRU officers from around NATO and our friends around the world in order to disrupt the networks of this vile organisation? Yeah.
Can I say to my honourable friend that he makes a very important point. I think it is important that we do now specifically look at the actions of the GRU and take action in relation to the GRU. That is about sharing our experience and our understanding of the GRU with our allies. This is about the threat that is potentially posed to other countries. It's not just about what happened here, heinous though that crime was, as my honourable friend has said. It is about ensuring a level of protection and security for everybody across Europe.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Global Witness have found that 43% of Scottish limited partnerships are controlled by persons with either a correspondence address or citizenship of a former Soviet state. However, there are still huge issues with compliance, and many SLPs have not even provided a person of significant control. Can I ask the Prime Minister for more detail on future legislation to combat dirty money laundered through SLPs, and whether resources and priority will be given to enforcing existing laws through Companies House, which remains a huge loophole in all of this?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, as I responded to her leader here, the Right Honourable Gentleman, in his response to his statement this afternoon, the Home Office and the Business Department have been working on this issue in relation to Scottish limited partnerships. They have been looking at some of these areas of abuse. We have, as a general point, stepped up our ability to deal with economic crime through the establishment within the National Crime Agency of the National Economic Crime Centre, and we are continuing to build up that ability to deal with economic crime. As I said, I'm sure that the Security Minister will be happy to speak to the Right Honourable Gentleman as leader of the SNP here about the action and the work that is being taken. There is an intention to legislate in this area. Obviously, we need to make sure that we're going to get this right. SLPs are not the only issue that has been raised in this area, and we need to look at a range of abuses.
John Whittingdale.
My right honourable friend has set out very powerful evidence that a British citizen died on British soil as a direct result of a Russian assassination. But she will be aware there have been a number of other deaths in Britain in the last few years of Russian citizens or people with close connections with Russia. Can she say whether those cases are now being actively re-examined?
Yes. Can I say to my right honourable friend that he's absolutely right to raise that issue. There have been a number of cases. I think the number of 13 or 14 comes into my head, but those have indeed been reconsidered by the police. They have looked at all the evidence in relation to those matters. I understand that a letter will be shortly going to the chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee setting out the outcome of that. But I understand that there is no cause for further consideration of those cases.
Chris Bryan.
I do not doubt for a single instant that the bloody trail goes all the way to the Kremlin and to President Putin himself personally. I don't think anybody acting for the GRU would go it alone. And I think that's what the Prime Minister meant when she said that this was not a rogue activity. The cynicism of the Russian state is phenomenal. It's not only the laws that have been passed to allow impunity for murderers when they go overseas, it's also the fact that yesterday the Russian embassy's response has been so far, can we have access to the Skripals, presumably to finish the job? Is it not important, if we cannot bring these people into a court in this country, which seems likely, that we make sure that there is a proper judicial process nonetheless in this country, such as the judge-led inquiry that was able to come to proper legal conclusions after Litvinenko?
Prime Minister.
Can I say first of all to the Right Honourable Gentleman, as I said in my statement, this was not a rogue operation. It was almost certainly also proved outside the GRU at a senior level of the Russian state. That was what I said in my statement. He raises the issue of the possibility of an inquiry to look at this. Obviously, we still have the police investigation ongoing in relation to the what happened at Amesbury. As I said, this is now a single investigation. There is no further line of inquiry beyond the two individuals who have been named in relation to the attack on the Skripals. And obviously, Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey was affected by that as well. Obviously, we will want to ensure that we look to ensure that steps are taken to make sure that we learn the appropriate lessons from this. In relation to bringing the individuals to justice, we will, if they do, I repeat, if they do step outside Russia, we will be straining every sinew and doing everything we can to bring them to justice in this country.
Richard Benyon.
The revolting regime of President Putin that has so
impoverished and abused the Russian people. As many fellow travellers and useful idiots across parliaments, right across what we assume are our allies, including the European Parliament, would my right honourable friend agree that the very professional diplomatic efforts that took place after the attacks by her government need to be continued with full vigour to make sure that our allies remain on side and understand what a terrible crime has been committed against one of their allies?
Yes, but my right honourable friend is absolutely right. I would, what I would also say, in addition to what the point that he has made, is that I think for those of our allies who did stand by us and who did take action after March, this confirms why it was right for them to do so. There were those who were sceptical internationally as well as within this chamber about the role of the Russian state at the time. I think the evidence that has now been produced shows absolutely the culpability of the Russian state, and I hope that in the international arenas we will now see countries which have exercised a degree of restraint in relation to their approach to this now recognising the role that Russia has played in this and acting accordingly.
Chris Leslie.
The extraordinary trail of evidence the Prime Minister has shared with the House today, the number of communities affected, isn't it all the more important that we do, from all corners of this chamber, express our total faith and confidence in the police and the security forces? And we don't do that simply so that we can pay lip service or thank the security forces. That confidence is important so that communities, if they have evidence or their witnesses, come forward and feel that it is legitimate to provide that to the security services. So can I urge the Prime Minister to ignore the cranks and the ideological extremists whose first instinct seems to be to sow mistrust in our security professionals?
Prime Minister.
Absolutely support what the right honourable gentleman has said. Our security professionals do an amazing job for us on a daily basis. We have seen the painstaking professionalism that they have shown in relation to this particular investigation that has led us to the position of the statements that the Metropolitan Police and I have been able to make today in relation to these two individuals and what happened in Salisbury. I think it is incumbent on all of us across the whole of this House unequivocally to give our support to those security services in the job that they do. We face a range of threats in this country. The people of this country need the reassurance of knowing that their politicians are giving the support that is necessary to the security services.
Sir Desmond Swain.
A decision outside the GRU by the Russian state at a senior level. She means President Putin, doesn't she?
Prime Minister.
I mean a decision outside the GRU at a senior level in the Russian state.
That's very coy.
John Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The public need to see that their elected representatives accept the forensically reached conclusions of the police and the British security services over the lies and propaganda that will be pumped out by our enemies. So it's heartening to see that the overwhelming majorities of speakers in this session have indeed accepted that. Now, she mentioned NATO. Does she agree that an attack by the Russian state on British soil using chemical weapons was sufficient had she wished to invoke Article 5, and does she reserve the right to do that in future if there is another act of aggression by the Russians?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that I think the interpretation of matters in relation to Article 5 do rest on matters of law apart from anything else. I think he has made a point early, though, which is very important, which is about the ability of this House to show the public, the emergency services and our security services, the support and reassurance of our determination not only to get to the bottom of what happened in Salisbury, and he's right, it is absolutely forensic, painstaking work that has led to our ability, from the police ability to identify these two individuals and for me to be possible to be here and be clear that they were members of the GRU and that link to the Russian state. And we should be eternally grateful
to them for the service that they provide for us. And we will continue to talk with NATO about the ways in which we can actually enhance NATO's ability to deal with malign state activity of the variety of sorts that we now see today. When NATO was established, it was very much on the basis of what would be seen as conventional warfare. Actually, if we look at these issues around propaganda and cyber attacks today, and I understand the propaganda has already started in relation to, from the Russian state in relation to the statements that have been made today, we need to look and make sure that NATO has the capabilities necessary to be able to deal with that. Yeah.
John Hayes.
Mr. Speaker, the character of espionage is changing as the methods by which it's conducted alter, partly as a result of technology. At the Home Office, my right honourable friend and I worked to make sure the right necessary legislation was in place. But given these events and others, will she look again at whether our excellent security and intelligence services need any further powers in order to do their work and keep us safe?
Well, my right honourable friend speaks, obviously, as he says, with experience as a security minister, and I'm grateful to him from the point that he makes. We had, of course, already been taking steps such as the enhancement of the power to stop people at ports where there is a suspicion that they may be involved in hostile state activity. Obviously, there is legislation going through the House in relation to enhancing our powers in certain areas in relation to counter-terrorism. But we, as my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, I think has already said, we will look at the issue of espionage legislation and at whether there is further that we need to do.
Peter Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After the attacks earlier in the year, our friends and our partners abroad came together in a fantastic way to bring pressure to bear against Russia and to respond to what happened on our soil here. In light of today's conclusions, that action should be seen as the start, not the end of international pressure, because Vladimir Putin only responds to strength, and international coordinated strength works best. Where next for that partnership?
Well,
Minister.
The honourable gentleman is absolutely right that we saw that important international coalition come together. Since that happened, of course, we have seen some further action being taken by individuals. The Russian action, the United States action in relation to sanctions against Russia, for example. We have also seen that coming together at the European Union level in relation to a sanctions regime for chemical weapons use, and we will be continuing to push on that matter. We'll also be continuing to push on sanctions in relation to Russia and to in a number of areas, so that the activity will be stepped up. The activity will be, in some sense, continuing, but we will continue to step up that pressure to bring to bear on our international allies. And as I said earlier in response to some questions, I hope the evidence that's been presented today will very clearly show why this is so important.
Dr. Andrew Murison.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for the government support that has been given to Wiltshire in its recovery phase? It continues to be very much needed. The apparent ease with which two GRU operatives were able to enter this country fills people with alarm, and it suggests continued vulnerability. What can be done, accepting the difficulty of detecting agents like Novichok at our ports and airports, to reduce the chances of substances of this sort and not just individuals entering the country and permitting a repetition?
Prime Minister.
Thank the honourable friend for his question. Can I first of all reiterate, as I did earlier, that I believe these individuals travelled on valid passports that were issued by the Russian government. We have looked at what is necessary at the ports. Of course, that's why we've responded in one element in particular, which is to give the power to the police, as they've had in other circumstances, to be able to stop people and to interview them at ports should there be a concern that they may be involved in hostile state activity.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has highlighted the fact that the US has imposed additional sanctions on Russia, but this is partly counterbalanced. So just a few weeks ago, Stephen Nation spoke about lifting sanctions on a Russian company with links to Putin's inner circle, and also as a reality, Congress has actually forced President Trump's hand a lot of the time. We've seen in Helsinki, Putin clearly ran rings round President Trump. So what discussions she had directly with the President to reinforce the importance of keeping these sanctions on Russia, and what you're going to do for support for additional sanctions going forward?
We've been talking to a number of our allies and partners in relation to the information that we now have as to what happened in Salisbury. As I've said, we will be continuing to talk, particularly in those fora where we have seen and have already generated activity in relation to future sanctions regimes, crucially within the European Union in relation to the chemical weapons sanction regime, and we will continue to press our allies on that.
Mr. Richard Graham.
Given that the Russian state will deny that Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshirov even exist, will my right honourable friend confirm if sufficient evidence from our excellent agencies can be shared with others who did not feel able to support the government in March, so that they can now join the 28 nations who acted in solidarity with us against a state that uses military intelligence officers and nerve agents to murder abroad?
Yeah, I can absolutely give my honourable friend that reassurance that we will be obviously sharing this information to ensure that those who he refers to are now aware of the further evidence that has been made available. And of course, it isn't just names of two individuals that have been put forward. The police have today released CCTV footage of the two individuals.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's comprehensive statement today highlights that the Russian state effectively put at mortal danger hundreds of British citizens, not least in our National Health Service, who so expertly treated the victims. So will the Prime Minister outline what measures she is putting in place to enhance the resilience of our chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear training, so that personnel across civilian and military services are able to deal with these threats? And in particular, we should review the decision to disband the CBRN regiment that was taken in 2011.
Yes, well, the Honourable Gentleman has raised an important point, and it gives me a further opportunity to commend the excellent work that was done by the National Health Service, faced with what was a very difficult case that would have, when this attack took place in Salisbury, which I think for many would have found difficult to deal with. The fact that they did so is a huge commendation of the professionalism of our National Health Service. There was a decontamination review that took place a couple of years ago, and the Home Office will be looking at a review of protective measures, as the Honourable Gentleman would expect.
James Gray.
Mr. Speaker, in joining with the Prime Minister and the whole House in warmly congratulating and thanking our armed services and intelligence service and police and all they've done, I hope she'll understand that I pay particular tribute to the Wiltshire Constabulary, who played an extraordinarily important role in this whole operation, and indeed the Salisbury Hospital and Salisbury NHS staff. Will she also forgive me if I ask two rather local questions, if I may? The first is, will she confirm the costs borne by the Wiltshire Constabulary will in fact be given to the Home Office rather than to the people of Wiltshire? And secondly, will she reconfirm to my constituents and to those people of the whole of Wiltshire that they now have no risk of any kind whatsoever from any remnants of Novichok poisoning?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend that I understand that the Home Office is indeed assisting the Wiltshire Constabulary with the costs, and some payments have already been made. He's absolutely right to commend the actions, I would say, of those who are police officers and indeed ambulance personnel and fire service personnel who were early on these scenes and who were faced with a situation. They didn't know exactly what was happening at the time, but they dealt with it very professionally, and we once again should commend them for the professionalism that they showed. In relation to the question of the surrounding area and people in the surrounding area, the message continues to be that there is a very low risk in the surrounding area. Of course, the police have put out an appeal today to the public with the CCTV footage, such that if anybody has any information that they are able to bring forward about having seen these individuals in any particular place, then they can bring that information forward. Of course, the police have conducted fingertip searches of all the areas of concern, and there is, as I say, a low risk to the public.
Mrs. Ellen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to add my congratulations to the police on their excellent detective work. We on this side of the House were pleased that the government added Magnitsky provisions to the sanctions bill. Section 3 of that Act provided for the appointment of an independent reviewer of counter-terrorism regulations. Has that appointment yet been made?
Minister.
Can I say to the honourable lady that I will write to her about that very particular question that she has asked me on that, if I may.
Jonathan Ginogly.
As my right honourable friend pointed out earlier, during the course of the summer, the United States increased its level of sanctions against Russia, specifically as a result of this heinous crime. So could I ask the Prime Minister whether, or to what extent, we're intending to replicate the sanctions that, that Russia has put in place, and are we intending to get our EU allies to do the same?
Can I say that obviously we have worked closely with our EU allies and others in relation to sanctions that relate to Russia. There are a number of sanctions that relate to Russia for a number of reasons at the moment, because of the various aspects of malign state activity that have taken place. We will be talking about. I've referenced the chemical weapons sanctions regime that the EU has agreed in principle to put forward. We will be working with our allies in relation to that. Of course, as of the 29th, after the 29th of March next year, we will have our own sanctions powers in place as an independent state, but we will want to continue to work with allies and others on that point. And Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I might just clarify a point that I've made in response to other questions about the new power to stop hostile state actors or those concerned of hostile state activity at the border. Of course, this is a matter that is before the House in the CT bill that is before the House. Well, I may have given the impression that it has already been passed, but it is currently before the House.
Thank you. Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A regime that is intent on committing murder around the world will inevitably make mistakes, and the extraordinary work of the police and security services that the Prime Minister has outlined has only punctured the myth of Putin's omnipotence. But can I ask her 2 points specifically? The first, can I ask what the government is doing, without going into detail perhaps, but can she assure that the government is pulling out all the stops to provide security to those UK assets like Mr Skripal, who is a former Russian intelligence agent? And can I ask her for an assurance that full coordination is also being undertaken with agencies such as Police Scotland?
Yes.
Prime Minister.
Certainly, I'm happy to give reassurance on both of those points that proper and full coordination is taking place with agencies such as Police Scotland. There's a very good working relationship between law enforcement across the United Kingdom, and that continues on this particular matter. As regards the protection of individuals here in the UK, this is a matter that was looked at obviously with urgency after what happened in Salisbury. My right honourable friend, the Security Minister, has chaired a number of meetings in relation to this matter and receives a regular update on it.
James Cleverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The evidence is compelling. The Russian state was involved. Will my right honourable friend condemn the Kremlin apologists and the false flag conspiracy theorists who have argued with those facts? And further, will she make it clear that our response, in whatever form is necessary, will be robust, will be decisive and will be unwavering?
I'm happy to give my honourable friend the reassurance that our response will be robust, it will be decisive, it will be unwavering, and it will be ongoing, because this is a matter that we need to continue to be working on. And I do condemn those who see fit to defend the Russian state where it is clear that they are culpable for this action that took place, this heinous crime that was committed on UK soil against citizens here in the United Kingdom.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the sheer weight of evidence that's been disclosed today regarding the Salisbury attack, can we expect the UK Government, along with its allies, to be ensuring further sanctions, including deportations of Russian state actors?
The question of further sanctions, I've indicated we will be looking at these issues on sanctions, including some aspects of new sanctions regime, such as I've referred to on the chemical weapons use across a regime from the European Union. And, of course, matters of the deportation of individuals rely on there being, obviously, the required evidence that enables the Home Secretary to take such a decision.
Bill Wiggin.
Can I commend my right honourable friend for the very cool way she's handled this bellicose threat? And particularly, does she agree with me that we should remind our constituents, and indeed the Russian people, that this state-sponsored GRU mission was a complete and abject failure, as the Skripals are still alive?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, obviously, that the Skripals are still alive. Sadly, we have seen the death of Dawn Sturgis. And obviously there was an impact not just on the Skripals, on Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey and on Charlie Rowley as well. But I think we should be able to give, through what I've shown today, I think we can give reassurance to people across the UK of the excellent professionalism which our security services and our police services show in response to this, in bringing us to the point where we are able to identify 2 individuals.
Mr Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for the way she's delivered the statement today and the work being done on this issue. As a member of the Counter-Terrorism Bill Committee, it's clearly the situation has shown her exactly why we need these powers to be brought into law. Can she therefore confirm that the Government will quickly seek to bring that bill to the floor of this House for its report stage and 3rd reading so it can continue its progress?
Yes. Yes, can I say to my honourable friend, we fully recognise the importance of this legislation and bringing it through. Can I thank him for the work that he's doing on that committee and his recognition of the significance of this legislation. Of course, the timing of legislation does depend on the business managers and other legislation, but we understand the importance of this and the need to get it on the statute book.
Nigel Huddleston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A deadly chemical attack on a British cathedral city is a truly shocking event. Yet the residents of Salisbury have shown great strength since the attack. What assurances can the Prime Minister give local residents and visitors to the Salisbury area that they can now carry out their activities safely? And what further support can the Government give the local environment in order to recover from the attack?
Yes. Well, can I say to my honourable friend that the Government has been working with the local authority and others in the Salisbury and Wiltshire area more generally to ensure that support was in place to be able to help these communities from the disruption and the difficulties that they had as a result of these incidents taking place. It is completely. I was very pleased earlier in the year, shortly after the attack took place, to visit Salisbury. As I said, the then Home Secretary has made two visits to Salisbury. Others have made visits to Salisbury. It is completely, I want people to go to Salisbury, I want people to enjoy Salisbury as a city, to enjoy Wiltshire as a great part of the UK to visit. Can I also say I've thanked the police and security services, and indeed I'd like to thank the local authority for the work that they've been doing, and indeed our honourable friend, the member for Salisbury.
Ross Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I commend my right honourable friend for her statement today. She referred to the response from Russia of extraordinary obfuscation and lies. So can my right honourable friend update the House on the actions that she will be taking to counter propaganda and the dissemination of disinformation from Russia?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I hope he will take the reassurance that we will be acting on this. There are a number of, I can't go into detail on everything that we will be doing, but we will be ensuring that we bring the full panoply of a national security apparatus to be dealing with the issues that we face in terms of this malign state activity.
Thank you. Order. Statement. The Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Family Support, Housing and Child Maintenance. Minister Justin Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With permission, I'd like to make a statement on widowed parents' allowance. Widowed parents' allowance is paid to those families in receipt of child benefit where one parent's husband, wife or civil partner died prior to the 6th of April 2017. It was replaced after this date by bereavement support payments, which are now paid by the government to families who find themselves in the same unfortunate circumstances. And new claimants have no eligibility to widowed parents' allowance. Last week, the Supreme Court ruled that the primary legislation that governs widowed parents' allowance is incompatible with the principles of European human rights law, as the benefit precludes any entitlement to widowed parents' allowance by a surviving unmarried partner. We are in the very earliest stages of carefully considering the full implications of this ruling, and officials at the Department are closely working with their counterparts in Northern Ireland to examine the judgment and what our next steps should be. However, as the House will be aware, only Parliament is able to change primary legislation, and Lady Hale ruled that a declaration of incompatibility does not change the law. It is then for the relevant legislature to decide whether or how it should be changed. Therefore, the Court's ruling does not change the current eligibility rules for receiving bereavement benefits. I would like to remind the House that the question of opening up bereavement benefits to cohabitees was debated and decided against in this place during the passage of the Pensions Act 2014. It was this legislation that introduced bereavement support payments, the successor to widowed parents' allowance. Mr. Speaker, it is worth noting that restricting bereavement payments to claimants who are in a legal union with the deceased has been a consistent feature of bereavement support in order to protect and clarify this entitlement. Other contributory benefits linked to national insurance contributions also contain special rules for claimants in a legal union. A legal union gives a surviving spouse the right to claim state benefits derived from their deceased partner's national insurance contributions. This principle provides a clear threshold for determining who can be provided for and a deceased person's NI accumulation and serves to promote the institutes of marriage and civil partnership. As I have stated, we are carefully considering the Court's judgment and how the Department should proceed in the light of this. When we have looked at all of the options, I will come before the House to update Parliament further on this matter.
Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Supreme Court ruled that the denial of widowed parents' allowance to surviving partners of unmarried couples with children is incompatible with the law in upholding the appeal of Siobhan McLaughlin, who lived with her partner John Adams and their 4 children for 23 years until John died in January 2014. I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of her statement, and I pay tribute to Siobhan McLaughlin and her family for their courage in pursuing this important case. Unmarried bereaved parents should not be subject to discrimination because of their marital status. Putting it simply, their children's needs are the same. The Supreme Court said the financial loss caused to families with children by the death of a parent is the same whether or not the parents are married or in a civil partnership. The financial support provided by the state can be vital to a family that is already grieving for their loss and who may also be facing financial hardship because of diminished income. The judgment relates to legislation in Northern Ireland, but unmarried couples are ineligible for parents' allowance in the rest of the UK as well, and so the principle established by the Supreme Court has wider implications. Bereaved parents are already contacting support organisations such as the Child Bereavement Network in the light of the judgment to ask for guidance. The Minister said that the Government is considering the Court's judgment and how the Department should proceed, but this judgment did not come out of the blue. In March 2016, the Work and Pensions Select Committee warned the Government that it could be forced to change its policy as a result of this specific case. The Select Committee, in its report, Support for the Bereaved, published in March 2016, clearly expressed the view that excluding unmarried couples was wrong. It said, penalising children on the grounds of the marital status of their parents is unjust. So what assessment has her department made of the cost of bringing the legislation on eligibility for widowed parents' allowance in line with the Supreme Court judgment in the whole of the UK? What assessment has her department made of the number of families who made a claim for widowed parents' allowance which was denied because the parents were not married? The Minister said that restricting eligibility to those in a legal union has been a consistent feature of bereavement support in order to protect and clarify this entitlement. However, whilst unmarried couples were treated differently when it came to making a claim for widowed parents' allowance, this does not apply when it comes to her department ending their claim, because if the surviving partner cohabits with a new partner, their claim is ended, just as it would be if they remarried or entered a civil partnership. The Minister said that it was for Parliament to change the law and referred to the vote in 2014. That led to the Government introducing the bereavement support payment in April 2017 to replace widowed parents' allowance and 2 other bereavement benefits. Yet it decided to continue to exclude unmarried couples, even though both members in this place and voluntary organisations working in the field called for eligibility to be extended to them. The Department for Work and Pensions itself estimated that 75% of bereaved families with children would receive less support under the new system. The Government claimed that it was motivated not by the desire to save money, but by the need to modernise financial support for bereaved families in order to better reflect society. Well, according to the Office of National Statistics, cohabiting couples are the second largest family type and the fastest growing. The number of cohabiting couples has more than doubled from 1.5 million in 1996 to 3.3 million in 2017. And the percentage of dependent children living in cohabiting couple families increased from 7% in 1996 to 15% in 2017. When the government introduced bereavement support payment to modernise support, why didn't it extend eligibility to unmarried couples? What message does that send to those children about how they are valued by this government? Will the government now act to bring bereavement support payment into line with the principle established by the Supreme Court that bereaved children should not be disadvantaged because of their parents' marital status? The purpose of financial support by the state for bereaved families is to try to ensure that, as far as possible, families struggling with the grief at the loss of a parent or partner should not have to face the additional worry of how they will manage financially. That should surely apply to families regardless of whether the parents were married or not, as the Supreme Court said last week.
Minister Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her response. And obviously, as in my initial statement, the court can't change primary legislation, and many of the points raised are the very points that we will be considering, including looking at potential impacts of any changes that could happen, and those I will happily update the House once we've had a chance to fully consider those. Now, many of the other points raised were at the very heart of the principles of why we brought forward the new bereavement payments process, because it's far simpler, it's a quicker process, and we did consider the point about cohabitation, but this is not straightforward, as was extensively debated during the Pensions Act in 2014, particularly as the regulations were brought forward, because that does make it a complex process, because it can be open to interpretation, leading to delays and additional burdens to claimants, particularly at a time of distress. And any extension could trigger multiple claims, i.e. if the bereaved was legally married to one person but living with a new partner, who therefore would become eligible. Now, under the new proposals, because the honourable member talked about families with children, I will challenge back on that, because the new system is easier and quicker. It's paid in addition to other household income. It's not taxed. It's not means tested. It's not applied to the benefit cap. These are all key areas that help those with the lowest income, as the principle was based on fairness. We also widen support so that anyone of working age would qualify, and younger spouses and civil partners without children would get support, and specifically for those bereaved with children, an additional £1,500 was paid as the first lump sum. And in some cases, additional benefits, whether through universal credit, child benefit, tax credits, or the funeral expenses payment, could be eligible for those families.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Whatever the decision of the court, in his deliberations, will he give consideration to the fact that there are many on these benches who have a preference for our own law made in this House over the provisions of European human rights law?
Minister.
I thank the honourable friend, and to reassure him, this has always been the founding principle of contributory benefits, and will, in our mind, should continue to be so.
Neil Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. He said that the Department was only consulting with Northern Ireland as the implications of this court ruling is. However, this is a UK reserve benefit, so why is that consultation not extending further? He also said that the Supreme Court ruling does not change the law, but the court ruling does say that the law as it stands is flawed. So not updating eligibility rules has the potential to store up further potential challenge to the new as well as the legacy benefit, given the precedent that has now been set by Siobhan McLaughlin's significant win. It would be grossly unfair and surely open to further challenge if the Minister did not come back to the House and explain how this decision was to be applied across the board. So can he confirm that the work he is now doing and undertaking with the Department is with that end destination in mind and not seeking to limit this significant win to just one family?
Yeah. I thank the honourable for his comments. Now, the actual court ruling did specifically apply to Northern Ireland, but I understand the point he's made, and I would be very happy to meet with him to discuss wider implications across the UK. In terms of the other points raised, those are the very things that we are considering, and I will update the House once we've had a chance to fully assess them.
Sir Mike Penning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I say to the Minister that I'm no fan
of the European courts, and I'm extremely pro-marriage. But we have to live in the modern world that we live in now. And when he's looking at whether or not how the government responds to this court ruling, can we look at something called fairness and natural justice? Many people would have been able to go to work because their partner stayed at home with the children, and then they've lost their loved one, they've lost their widow, but they're not married. We need to show compassion at the same time understanding the benefit system.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and I think that's a very fair point to raise. And as we, with any of the benefits that we provide for those in need, it is always underpinned with the principle of fairness.
Frank Field.
I welcome the Minister back to the Treasury bench after a very short period with the Select Committee. Might I say that some disappointment that more progress has not been made that he could have reported to the House today. In other areas of social security, the cohabitation rule applies, and evidence of cohabitation can be the evidence of male slippers in the house or home. Here we have evidence of children. There's no doubt about this was a stable union, and surely in these cases, following the Right Honourable Gentleman who's just made that intervention from the government side, fairness is not operating.
Minister.
I thank the honourable member, and I enjoyed my very brief 4 or 5 weeks as part of his Work and Pension Select Committee, where he was a formidable and excellent and well-respected chair. Fairness is the key. In defence, the judgment was only last week. It would have been churlish of me to make a rush decision. This has very serious implications, and we need to consider this carefully, and I will return to update the House as quickly but as sensibly as possible.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, when I served on the Work and Pension Select Committee under the chairmanship of the excellent Right Honourable Member for Birkenhead, whose party no longer seems to find room for him, but he remains chairman of the committee, we looked at various issues to do with the widowed parents allowance. And can I hope that my honourable friend will look carefully at the recommendations in that report, which did tackle both the issue of partners, but also of how income would be treated under universal credit, because there is a question of fairness about the way in which widowed parents' allowance is currently treated.
I thank the honourable friend, and that was an important point that he raises, and that's why under the new benefit payments, any income that is gained is not means tested and does not apply towards the benefit cap, to make sure that they aren't given money in one hand and it's taken away in the other, making sure that the most vulnerable people do get the support that they need.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to tell the Minister that I went and met with his predecessors about this, because it's very clear that legislation written in 1958 should not mean that children in 2018 are living in poverty. But we have cases of parents having to get married in the ICU to avoid the humiliation that this legislation puts. So will he learn from Germany, where the money follows the child through orphan pensions, and marriage isn't the requirement but parenting is? Because frankly, telling parents that they've only got 18 months to grieve is hurtful. Telling them that their family didn't exist because they didn't put a ring on it is completely unforgivable. I hope he will take my offer to meet with the campaigners from Walthamstow, the women who've been directly affected by this, and I hope finally we'll bring this legislation into 2018.
I thank the honourable member. I would be happy to meet with her and her colleagues. I've worked before with her on a number of issues, and I'm happy to extend that invitation on that. It is a balance, because contributory benefits have always, as a tradition, been the principle that inheritable benefits are based on the concept of a legal marriage or civil partnership, because it does provide legal certainty. I understand the points that have been raised, and these are the things that we are considering following the judgment.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the Minister will recognise that in any case like this would be distressing circumstances where someone has lost a parent, and therefore looking at some of the legal niceties may not be the point they first turn to. But would you agree with me that when the government looks at this, they will consider very carefully a system that is compassionate but also brings clarity so that people know exactly when they'll qualify?
I thank my honourable friend. And yes, as I've said, fairness must underpin this. We do not want to have a complex benefit, because particularly these people, it's a very distressing time. We want it to be simple, quick, and providing the support to those most in need.
Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems quite clear that the will of the House is that a child who's lost a parent should not be penalised because of the marital status of the parent. So can I ask the Minister whether he intends to carry out an equality impact assessment in relation to this benefit?
Well, as part of the commitment to bringing in the new bereavement payments, we will be doing a full impact assessment, and that will be shared with the House. One of the key changes was the additional £1,500 for the initial payment for those either in marriage or civil partnerships who had children. So we understand the importance of making sure that those with children get additional support.
Debbie Abrahams.
Can I echo the calls in terms of showing some compassion and some fairness when dealing with children that are affected? I would also like to gently remind the Minister that this is the 7th ruling in the last 18 months against different aspects of the government's social security policy, and it would be appropriate for the government to show some humility and listen.
I thank the honourable member, but these are the principles that govern us. The new system that we brought in provides immediate support. It prioritises help for those on the lowest incomes. It recognises those with children, regardless of age, need that additional immediate support. And we will continue to assess both the ruling of the court in relation to Northern Ireland and the wider implications of the new benefit.
Stephen Lloyd.
Mr. Speaker, first off, I would urge that the government accept the ruling from the courts. And the second thing is, a number of colleagues on both sides of the House have talked about fairness. It's a basic thing of right or wrong here, because I would ask the Minister, why is it that the Department takes account of cohabiting couples when determining eligibility for universal credit, but then denies those same households bereavement support if one of them passes away?
I thank the honourable member. I would gently remind him that it was his former colleague Steve Webb who steered through the Pensions Act in 2014, where this was extensively debated. But the principle of the new benefit is about fairness and delivering the immediate and quick support for those most in need.
Ms Savile Roberts.
I too thank for advance sight of the statement. Donna McClelland in my constituency died on the 20th of May. She leaves 2 sons, Cian and Daniel, and her partner of 24 years, Arwell Pritchard. They were engaged, but they had prioritised buying a house over the cost of getting married. Arwell and Donna put their children's home first. When will the government bring forward a review with which to console Mr Pritchard and admit that a legal contract is not a precondition for consoling a grieving family?
May I pass, first of all, my personal condolences to the family in this very distressing time. I understand the points being made. These are the things that are being considered. But in the short term, I would urge them to look at the other potential benefits that could be offered to support through UC, through tax credits. But these are the things, and as soon as we can, I will return to update the House following the ruling in the courts last week.
Patricia Gibson.
Mr Speaker, during a debate, I pressed the then Minister on the 2nd of March 2017 on bereavement support benefit for cohabiting couples. I pointed out that cohabiting couples are treated as couples for other benefits such as tax credits, and I was told by the then Minister that extending eligibility to cohabitees would, and I quote, increase spend and be complex to administer. Now, despite what the Minister has said about legal certainties, we know that many bereaved family cohabitees and their children have lost out because of the reluctance of the UK Government to recognise them as families and as married couples. In the light of the court judgment and the hardship caused to bereaved cohabitees and their children, does he not think that today that the Government should apologise for this inaction? And does he not agree that as soon as possibly can be arranged, this needs to be corrected retrospectively in order that justice is given to the people affected?
Thank the honourable member. And you know, this was considered at great length during the Pension Act 2014 debate and the following bringing forward of the regulations. And It isn't straightforward, because how do you act as judge and jury in the situations where somebody could be living with a different partner? At a time of great distress, the emphasis has to be providing appropriate quick support, particularly targeted at those in the most need. But the points raised, which is what we are having to consider following the ruling in the Supreme Court, will be considered, and I will come back as quickly as is appropriate to provide an update to the House.
Mr. Speaker, it's an important principle that social security should be a safety net for us all, because we cannot predict the circumstances such as the death of a partner and parent, which could happen at any time, and children should not lose out regardless of the marital status of their parents. Can I ask the Minister how much his department has spent in fighting this decision in the courts, and can he confirm absolutely conclusively, has the department ruled out appealing this decision?
And it's absolutely right to highlight that we should be providing support. That's why, with the new benefit, we've widened the support that's available to anyone of a working age, to younger spouses, civil partners without children will now get support. That it isn't lost when you move into a new relationship. And we will continue to review following the court last week, and I will fully update the House.
Mr. Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Under-Secretary's statement didn't contain the word sorry, and following on from the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire and Arden, given I'm the last, I'll give the Minister an opportunity to say sorry to the individuals affected. Can he also tell us how many policies of welfare benefit system has been found to be illegal since 2010?
I would remind the Honourable Member, first of all, as I've previously said, we are considering the ruling in the Supreme Court. But as we have demonstrated with the introduction of the new bereavement payments, we've made it easier to claim. We're paying in addition to other household income. It's not taxed, it's not means tested, not applied to the benefit cap. We've extended the access to it, and we are targeting at those most in need. It is that principle of fairness that underlies not just these reforms, but all of our benefit reforms.
Rule motion, Mrs Pauline Latham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given for me to bring in a bill to raise the minimum age of consent to marriage or civil partnership to 18 and for connected purposes. In this country, young people have to stay in educational training until they're 18, but they can marry before that at the age of 16, but only with parental consent. UNICEF believes that marriage before the age of 18 is a fundamental violation of human rights. I agree, and I believe it should be banned in this country. Following the first Girls' Summit in 2014, the Department for International Development allocated up to £39 million over 5 years to support global efforts in preventing child marriages. By its proactive contribution, the UK recognised that child marriages resulted in early pregnancy, girls facing social isolation, interrupted schooling, limited career and vocational opportunities, as well as the increased risk of domestic violence. So why are we not leading the way by increasing the legal age of marriage in this country from 16 to 18, the recognised age of adulthood? Under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, it states that the world has pledged to end marriages in which one or both spouses are under 18 by 2030. But many Commonwealth countries still follow the legal lead of the UK. In Bangladesh, for instance, the official minimum age of matrimony is 18 for women and 21 for men, but a new provision allows child marriage to take place under special circumstances, that is, with parental consent and with permission from courts. Lobbyists for this provision cited the current UK law as an example of why their legal age of marriage should be lowered. Changes to laws in the UK reverberate around the world, but this is not the only reason that fresh impetus should be given to increasing the minimum age for marriage from 16 to 18. It should be our priority to protect children, and that may mean from themselves as well as from potential dangers from others. And as we celebrate this year the centenary of the suffragette movement, we should recall it was pressure from those magnificent campaigners which brought about the Marriage Act of 1929. Until then, there was no defined minimum age, and making it 16 was seen as protecting children. However, 90 years ago, most young people would have been wage earners, unlike now, when in England they must either stay in full-time education, training, or start an apprenticeship. None are compatible with a married environment. In fact, my own mother, along with very many others, began their working life after leaving school at 14. So life was very different in those days. But in the United Kingdom, children of 16 and 17 need the consent of their parents to be married. Surely this shows that they're not mature enough to make the decision themselves. But this is not the safeguard it may once have been, because it opens the door for forced marriages, or at least pressure to be exerted upon young people to marry to fulfil family demands. We've outlawed forced marriages here due to a campaign by Jasvinder Sanghera of Karma Nirvana, which started in Derby. And I would like the Women's and Equalities Minister to meet her at some time in the future. Marriage is a major life decision for which children are not emotionally and physically ready. Setting the minimum age of marriage at 18 provides an objective rather than subjective standard of maturity which safeguards a child from being married when they are not physically, mentally, or emotionally ready. Many would argue that there should be a minimum level of maturity and free and full consent about whether, whom, and when to marry. The International Human Rights Conventions on Women's Rights and Children's say countries should end the practice of enabling child marriage below 18. Thus, the UK is violating these same commitments. International law is very specific about who should be allowed to marry. If a country wants to permit exceptions to the minimum age of 18, mature, capable children are allowed to marry only in exceptional circumstances at age 16 or older, when such decisions are made by a judge based on legitimate exceptional grounds defined by law and without deference to culture and tradition. So by allowing 16-year-olds to marry without consent for a judge, the UK is breaking international law. But that hasn't stopped the UK from telling other countries to follow the same rules that it is flouting. To allow the voting age in the UK to 16 felt that raising the legal age of marriage was in conflict with other people's efforts. It's all important to realise that the UK has a duty to live by the very standards it's keen to advocate for in the developing world. As well as trying to eradicate child marriage around the world, it is also crucial that the UK meets international human rights standards at home to end this harmful practice. In 1951, Pew versus Pew set legal precedent in handling a case relating to the capacity for the young to be married. In his conclusion, Mr. Justin Pearce said, "According to modern thought," this is 1951, remember, "it is considered socially and morally wrong that persons of an age at which we now believe them to be immature and provide for their education should have the stresses, responsibilities, and sexual freedom of marriage and the physical strain of childbirth. Child marriages by common consent are bad for the participants and bad for the institution of marriage." I believe his words are as relevant today as they were 70 years ago. We have a system that is outdated, that we need to change, so that we have all sorts of things you can do at different ages, and I believe we should be looking at moving them all to 18, or most of them to 18, but certainly 16, in most people's view, means that they are still children, and that we should be looking at giving them the opportunity to get married when they are more mature and more sensible and settled in their lives, more settled in their lives than they are if they're still at school. Can anybody imagine when they're at school, how on earth can you sustain a married life when you've got strains of exams, you've got GCSEs, you've got A-levels, you've got education in colleges, you've got so many pressures on your life at that age that to have a marriage intruding on that as well will mean that those young people who think that they're mature actually will have huge strains, and it will stop them fulfilling their potential. So I believe we should now show the world how seriously we take them and increase the minimum age in England and Wales to 18. Thank you.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. Mr. Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And in rising, I'll be clear, I'm not proposing to divide the House on this matter, but I thought it was right to offer some observations and I must say some concerns that I do have on the motion that's put forward by the suggestion of the bill. Now, in starting, I first of all recognise that for many people, getting married at 16 is not the right choice to be making in life, particularly if there's any form of coercion, and which there should never be in marriage. Marriage should be something that's unique and special, entered into by two loving people of their own free will and free choice, not where anyone of either side feels there's a particular obligation to do so. But in looking at the proposal to bring forward this bill, it raised quite a number of questions in my own mind, and the obvious point we start out is the fact that if we put the age to marriage at 18, do we also put the age of sexual consent to 18? Now, that could be a separate debate. Within the last 20 years, in the time of some members sat in the chamber this afternoon, there were quite impassioned debates in this chamber about equalisation of the age of consent at 16. That now, some of those arguments used against seem rather odd now, even only 20 years later. But it then again brings that debate of, are we going to reopen the issue of whether the age of consent should be set at 18 or at 16? Again, what would the implications be for those who are currently married? I'm presuming if a bill was brought forward, it would exempt those who at 16 and 17 who had already freely got married. But again, it would be quite onerous to suddenly have a situation where someone at 16, when a data law came in, had legally married, yet someone at 17 now had to wait to their 18th birthday. I accept the points that are made, and it's obvious that there is a point that they're strongly made around the idea that you can't just get married at 16 or 17 without an element of consent. But this is a very long-standing legal age, and I say for me, there's all sorts of arguments about what should be at 16, what should be at 18. And again, like we've just talked about with the issue around widowed parents' allowance and the supposed benefits there and the impact of marriage or not being married as parents, how that implicates this. Again, it would be at 16 you could decide to make if we didn't change the age of consent, the life-changing decision to have children, yet you couldn't actually get married until you were 18. I think that would be a bit of an oddity in our law. I appreciate the position in terms of what it might send internationally, but again, most countries do have the similar type of provisions around the age of consent to the United Kingdom. And of course, it's worth pointing out that at the moment, I believe the age is shared between ourselves and I think Scotland at 16 in terms of the minimum age. If England and Wales was at 18, what would be the position if literally a run to Gretna was done, as was very popular in previous generations when the laws of marriage in Scotland were different to the laws of marriage in the United Kingdom? What would be the position in terms of recognising marriage certificates, and of course from Northern Ireland as well? Separate jurisdictions, still part of the United Kingdom. How would we recognise that? And I know for the Scottish National Party it's disappointing that's still part of the United Kingdom, but we would miss the member for Glasgow East too much. But in terms of looking more seriously at the point, this would be something that I think for me would be a very significant moment to have in the United Kingdom, where potentially we could have marriages in relation to age. And particularly at a time where we're actually arguing that the situation in Northern Ireland, where those of the same sex cannot get married, some very powerfully arguing in this chamber that should be brought to an end, that the situation of equal marriage should be spread across. It would then be strange to have a situation where we have a different of age threshold for doing that. Given these concerns, it then brought me on to whether it was really right that this is in a private member's bill. I accept that private members' bills can be good vehicles for looking at faults in the law, looking at changing things, looking at areas that may not necessarily be significant, but where do have a need to bring a piece of primary legislation. I've passed one of my own private members' bills through this House around small-scale digital radio that I see one or two members who participated in those debates sitting in the chamber We've also had issues, rightly thinking I see the member for Bath in her place, bringing up the issue around upskirting, a fault in the law that needed to be resolved to give the law its actual intention. However, with this is a much more significant change. And for me, I would suggest that it's actually something that if we were to do, one, should follow a more significant consultation process, and two, also should actually be more appropriately debated in government time, where we'd have the type of time available to make proper and informed debates and observations, whereas as a regular attender on Friday, I see all too often the fact, and particularly at this stage of the session, where a 10-minute rule bill would not get any debate at second reading. I think it's almost certain it wouldn't get any debate at report stage, given the numbers of remaining stages already listed for the remaining 2 Fridays of this session. To make such a significant change to our law, in terms of the wider implications it could have, would for me be odd. And as I say, in speaking, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is clearly an argument around the ages that we can do things. It is odd that, as the Honourable Member for Mid-Derbyshire said, a life-changing commitment can be made at 16, yet you can't drive a truck or a steam-powered road roller until you're 21. It is that certain products can be bought at 18, but certain things can only be done, you can drive a car at 17, that there is a whole area. But again, that then tempts me towards it more being something that really should be looked at following a proper review of our law, potentially on a government bill, or following a proper Law Commission examination of what would be the knock-on effects if we decided to make such a significant change. So for me, I don't disagree with some of the thrust of the arguments being put forward. I think there clearly needs to be a potentially, in fact, I'm sure I see the Minister, who's a very diligent listener, sat in his place, who will sort of look at considering how we make sure that provisions around parental consent are now actually meaningful in a way that they perhaps would have been in the past, but rather, let's say today, may not be. In fact, the parents may be the source of the pressure, rather than actually, in theory, the law sees them as a safeguard. That in particular, that provision based on an old patriarchal view of society, that effectively it wouldn't actually be the parents, it would be the male head of the household who would effectively be giving consent for a daughter to get married. That clearly is a view of the past, and something that we would not look to codify into law today. How it can be made more meaningful, yes, we should look to target forced marriage, but I have some concerns that making such a significant change to a very long-standing provision of law that then has clear knock-on effects for many other aspects of our legislation, that they should be done via a 10-minute rule bill that potentially is going to receive next to no debate, when in reality I think these are matters that should be more properly considered, potentially one, via the government looking into it, and I'm sure there'll be constructive engagement, and secondly, via consultation, and then following that, a bill via a process that would give us the time for appropriate discussion on the floor of the House, that would give us the ability to examine in more depth, and also give the ability, let's be blunt, for more than 2 speakers, which is probably, sadly, given the procedures which we could debate for a long time here in relation to private members' legislation, these are likely to be the only 2 speeches on this bill that in this particular session on this issue. So, whilst, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said when I stood up, I don't intend to divide the House. I appreciate many of the sentiments here. I've written articles myself about, is there a debate about 16 and 17-year-olds and looking at the law in relation to people much older than themselves who are relations. Take the view, once you're 18, it's up to you. You're an adult, who your partner should be, what sex they should be, and what any other factors. The only determinant should be that it's a loving and consenting relationship. But I just think to do this via a 10-minute rule bill is where my concerns come. And whilst it's right that this issue has been brought up today, brought to the floor of the House, I think personally I do have some concerns. And whilst I won't divide the House, I do think it's right that some comments were made in concern about the motion. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Priti Patel, Stephen Twigg, Jeremy Lefroy, Chris Philp, Sarah Champion, James Duddridge, Sir Graham Brady, Mr Virendra Sharma, Henry Smith, Philip Davis, Sir Roger Gale and myself.
Mrs Pauline Latham.
Marriage and Civil Partnership Minimum Age Bill.
Second reading what day?
26th of October.
26th of October. We now come to the Tenant Fees Bill point of order. Sir.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's just to seek your guidance and clarification on the business ahead of us today, because obviously there are two very important bills, the Tenant Fees Bill and the Voyeurism (brackets) Offences Bill. And I was just seeking clarification whether item number 6, which is selection, that my honourable friend member for Daventry be discharged from the selection committee and my honourable friend member for Calder Valley be added, whether this item will still be reached even if we go past the moment of interruption. Just seeking your guidance on that.
The answer is that this item can still be reached and can still be moved. Yes, it is properly on the order paper and the time will come for the House to properly address it. I thank the honourable gentleman for giving me the opportunity to clarify the matter. So we come to the Tenant Fees Bill, programme number 2. Programme motion, Minister to move. The question is the Tenant Fees Bill, programme number 2 motion as on the order paper. As many as that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Tenant Fees Bill, not amended in the Public Bill Committee, to be considered.
We begin with Government Amendment 5, with which it will be convenient to consider Government Amendments 6 and 7, Amendments 1 and 2, Government Amendments 8 to 23, Amendment 4, Amendment 3, and Government Amendments 24 to 48. Minister to move, Mr. Rishi Sunak.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I formally beg to move that Amendment 5 and all subsequent government amendments are made. I will speak to all of our amendments, but for ease we'll take them in a slightly different order to which they have been set out, as you outlined. And just before we start, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I welcome my honourable friend, the member for South Derbyshire, back to her place on the front bench. Everything which we are discussing today is built on the foundation of her incredible diligence in preparing this bill for us to discuss at committee, where I enjoyed constructive discussions with my opposite number, and I'm delighted that she is back with us to help us move the bill through its final stages in this chamber. Amendments 5 and 6, Madam Deputy Speaker, ensure that landlords and agents cannot charge any fees to tenants in the event of default except under those circumstances set out in paragraph 4 of Schedule 1. This now specifically includes prohibiting default fees that may have been set out in a separate agreement between the agent and the tenant rather than in the tenancy agreement. More generally, Madam Deputy Speaker, our provision on default fees in paragraph 4 of Schedule 1 has been the source of much discussion and debate. Indeed, the Honourable Member for Great Grimsby has herself suggested an amendment to the provision. Members from across this House, the Select Committee, and evidence provided to the Bill Committee have agreed with the principle that it is not fair for landlords to pay fees that arise from the fault of the tenant. However, we have listened to concerns expressed by honourable members at second reading and committee, including the honourable members for Great Grimsby and Dulwich and West Norwood, but also from tenant groups and the Chartered Institute of Trading Standards, that the default fees provisions, as currently constructed, may be open to abuse. Happy to give that.
Could I give a case of one of my constituents, which is not uncommon of other constituents and won't be uncommon of constituents throughout the country? It's a young mother paid a deposit of £595 to the landlord. This was for a wet, mildew house in Rock Ferry in Birkenhead. when she was driven out by the mould, the landlord claimed that the bins were not emptied by the local authority, so that she lost her 595 deposit. She wished to pay her rent for her new property to coincide with her universal credit payments, and the landlord said, well, there's no repayment of your previous deposit, and I want £900 up front if I'm changing the rent day. In the meantime, during all this stress, my constituent lost her triplets. Is she going to be covered by the bill and as amended today, please?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and without delving into the specific details, without knowing the full facts, what I can say is the example he gives is exactly the kind of bad practice that the government is designed to stamp out. And it's not just in this piece of legislation which tackles the specific issue of tenant fees, but across the piece the government is examining the private rented sector to make sure that there is balance and fairness between tenants and landlords. He touched on the specific issue of the health and habitation and whether particular properties are fit for habitation. Indeed, his honourable friend, the member for Westminster North, has proposed a bill which the government is delighted to be supporting and bringing through the House, which will tackle exactly that specific issue. And with regard to the issue of transferring tenancy deposits from one tenancy to another, those are out of the scope of this piece of legislation, but the honourable gentleman will be pleased, right honourable gentleman will be pleased to know that the government has already convened a working group to examine the specific issue of deposit passporting. That group has already met, and the findings will be published in the spring of next year.
Intervene again. There's no transporting the deposit. She loses the deposit and then is faced with another deposit of £900 to get the rent payment day in line with the universal credit payments.
The specific issue around one tenancy ending and the deposit process for recovering part or all of that deposit and starting a new tenancy is out of the scope of this piece of legislation, but will indeed is the subject of the working group that has been set up by the government with the sector to examine, because there are some interesting ideas for how to solve the problem that the right honourable gentleman has outlined. Happy to give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and of course the right honourable member for Birkenhead has quite rightly raised a horror story on behalf of his constituent. However, will the Minister acknowledge that there are many very highly professional letting agents around the country that seek to do the very best service for their customers under the difficult circumstances that they sometimes face?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I do entirely agree with him. This bill is not about driving letting agents out of business, is that indeed it is about levelling the playing field so that the small minority of bad actors in the industry